Okay, good morning, everyone. Oops, we're getting a little echo. Great. Good morning, everyone. My name is Michelle Wu, City Councilor at Large and Chair of the Boston City Council's Committee on Post-Audit and Oversight. I am joined by several colleagues this morning, our sponsors, Councilor Andrea Campbell and Councilor Julia Mejia, as well as Councilor Kenzie Bach, and I know others will likely join as we go. This public hearing is on docket number 0828, order for a hearing to review all grants, city funds, and city programs for violence prevention and intervention purposes. This public hearing is being recorded and live streamed at boston.gov/city-council-tv, and it will be rebroadcast on Comcast Channel 8, RCN Channel 82, Verizon Channel 1964. We will take public testimony throughout the hearing. We'll start, I see Councilor Flynn is here as well. Thank you for the message, Councilor Flynn. We will take public testimony throughout the hearing. If you wish to testify by video conference and have not signed up, please email Michelle Goldberg for the link. Her email address is Michelle, MICHELLE .a.goldberg, GOLDBERG, at boston.gov for the link. When you're called for public testimony, please state your name and your affiliation or address and limit your comments to no more than 2 minutes so that all comments and concerns can be heard. You may also submit written testimony by emailing ccc.pa@boston.gov. That's City Council Committee for Post Audit, ccc.pa@boston.gov. So at this point, I will go first to my colleagues for an opening statement from councilors who are present, and then we will take just 2 or 3 people from public testimony, depending on if I can identify who signed up for what. And then we'll go to an administration panel with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 members for testimony and question and answer from councilors, a little bit of more public testimony, then to a community-based organizations panel following that, and Q&A following. So we'll start with our lead sponsor of this docket number, Councilor Andrea Campbell.
Thank you, Councilor Wu, for chairing the hearing, of course, and thank you, Councilor Mejia, for the partnership, of course, and thank you to all of the panelists, both panel 1 and panel 2, and we'll try to move through this in such a way that people are not beginning to testify like hours from now, just being mindful of people's time, but really appreciate folks showing up to this hearing and being a part of the conversation. This, in many ways, is a continuation of the hearing that I held last August, actually in Mattapan at the Mattapan Library. It's very much in community. It was a packed house, and we were there to figure out or to review how much money in terms of grants the city received towards violence prevention. And frankly, I left a little disappointed in the hearing because I felt like we didn't learn enough about the total monies received and how the city measures the impact of these dollars and strategies in order to be effective when it comes to violence prevention work. Our city, we know, spends millions of dollars every year in anti-violence efforts, with incidents of violence. But we know that incidents of violence, especially homicide, have actually increased, including in my district. And my son Aiden in the background is also acknowledging all of this. And homicides were up 39% over last year, which is really sad and disturbing. Our communities, of course, are hurting from the pandemic that has disproportionately impacted communities of color, increased gun violence in our neighborhoods, and the public and painful murders and shootings of Black men and women by police have deepened that trauma in all of our communities across the city of Boston. We also know that certain communities, and particularly residents of color, are disproportionately stopped by and investigated. We know this from our FIO data. That also is traumatic with respect to certain communities or residents in the city of Boston. And so this is an opportunity for us, again, to come to the table and have a conversation, and a specific one, around not only how much money we receive for violence prevention, intervention work, but also what is our strategy. What is the impact and that we want to have? What metrics do we use to determine whether or not we are actually being impactful on those numbers? And how do we do that, most importantly, in partnership with community-based organizations? So I'm really excited for those folks on panel 2 who are on the ground as well, doing the work in partnership with us often with little resources or limited resources, but with incredible passion to get the work done. And so again, looking forward to the conversation. Thank you again, Councilor Mejia, for the partnership, and thank you, Councilor Wu.
Thank you, Councilor Campbell. Councilor Mejia. Oh, you're on mute.
Of course, that's why I asked if you could hear and see me before I start battling. So just wanted to thank my co-sponsor, Councilor Campbell, for all your hard work in this space, as well as Councilor Wu. I just mistakenly shut down my computer. So I'm just gonna have to wing it because those were my remarks. But I just wanted to say, you know, our office this summer dedicated our work to working with young people and mental health issues. And so this comes at a great time for us to have this conversation. But I wanted to just start off by stating that I started off my career in the youth development space at a time in the mid to late 90s when violence was at its all-time high here in the city of Boston. And the fact that now, 20-something years later, yes, I have good melanin, but here I am still doing this work and having the same conversation. And it's gotten to the point where we really have to start really thinking strategically and thoughtfully about how we're funding programs and what those outcomes are, and who is at the table deciding how these dollars get allocated. So I'm really looking forward to having this conversation. But more importantly is what we leave from this discussion and how we utilize what we learn in this space to really inform our thinking so that we can be a little bit more thoughtful in the planning and making sure that we are fully funding our programs in ways that are going to lead to the impact that we are seeking. So I would like to thank the panelists, those who have been doing the work, even many of which have been doing the work without any funding, like Monica Cannon-Grant, who just recently is setting up her brick and mortar, basically, but you know, for a long time had been doing a lot of the work in this space in the city of Boston with very little funding. So really looking at equity and diving into this conversation so that we're not having a conversation to have a conversation, but that we're actually going to move the work forward. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Councilor Mejia. Councilor Bach.
Madam Chair, I'm going to defer just so we can get to the testimony, but very glad to be here today.
Thank you very much. Councilor Flynn.
Thank you, Councilor Wu, and thank you to Councilor Campbell and to Councilor Mejia for your work on this important subject. I want to say thank you to the panelists that are here, the city officials that are here as well, and the people in the community that are doing outstanding work on anti-violence measures. And just this morning, I was on a call, just a little bit of background, I was on a call with the Chinatown community about ways we can improve the quality of life in the neighborhood. But you know, there's a lot of great organizations doing excellent work in the community, but also it's critical that the police play an important role as well, and that's building relationships and trust that I have seen over the many years. I know Deputy Bailey's on this call, and I saw Deputy Bailey and several Boston police officers participating in Operation Thank a Vet several months ago, knocking on doors of veterans and homeless, talking to homeless veterans about services the city provides. But it's so many different organizations that are working together. The VCYF team, while a lot of people are away in the summer and down Cape Cod and the mountains of New Hampshire or Maine, you know, the VCYF team is helping kids in public housing, giving them food and playing basketball. That's what this city is all about. So we always can improve and make things better. But what I see in my experience, and I know Frank DeLuca is on as well. I worked with Frank when I was a probation officer. He did a lot of reentry programs. But what I see also is city officials doing exceptional work in our communities, and probably at times they don't get the credit that they deserve. Not that they're looking for credit, but I just wanted to highlight some of the city officials. But it's important to continue building those positive relationships with nonprofits, with the community. I see Rufus. Rufus is on the line. We did a hearing last week on Corey reform. That's also a critical part of our crime prevention strategy as well. And Chief Martinez on public health initiatives. So those are my comments, and I just want to let people know I'm here to be helpful in continuing to promote our city workers to make sure that they have the resources and tools to get their job done. Also making sure that our nonprofits are part of the solution as well. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Flynn. So at this point, I know I had said we would take 3 people from public testimony, but I've learned that there are only 4 people signed up total. So we'll make sure that everyone from the public doesn't have to wait a long time. So if it's okay with all the panelists, I'd like to just get all 4 of these individuals in so we can hear from them up front, as our sponsors have asked for. So first up is going to be Dana DePelto, and then followed by Danielle Doder, Dominic Ellis, and Rayquan Gibbons. Oh, Councilor Mejia, did you have something?
Yeah, no, Councilor Wu, I thought that Councilor Campbell had recommended that we start with the panel 1 because that's how there's some scheduling situation. But so that was
No, this is the public testimony part. I'm okay with the folks from the community going, and then we can go straight to panel 1. And then the panel 2 is Tina and those organizations. Thanks, Councilor Mejia.
Perfect. Thank you for leading with the people. I appreciate it.
Thank you both. Okay, so Dana, if you could again keep it to 2 minutes and just identify yourself and your affiliation or address. I'm going to be harsh about keeping time. Thank you.
Councillor Wu, thank you so much for allowing public testimony, and all of the city councilors and city officials, and of course all the volunteers that are helping with this pandemic, as I definitely want to acknowledge all the youth in our city who have more or less become accustomed to shooting one another in the streets as an act of normal behavior. About 2 weeks ago, or a week and a half ago, there was 29 shell casings right outside of our house, 29 bullets. That's a lot of bullets for anyone that has been around for a long time. And I think these individuals were no older than 13, 14 years old. And it's sad, and I definitely want to recognize those children, and it's not their fault. We need to do better as a city. I'm a numbers person, so really my question to our city councilors is a general disappointment. I have reached out to chief of staff of a local city councilor requesting a budget. I'm a numbers person. I want to see numbers. I want to see 2020 actuals of how much the city of Boston has actually spent on violence prevention. I think that is something that the city deserves to see, and not wait for a city council hearing such as this. My questions are, who applies for these grants? Are they city or organizations that are applying for them? What was the dollar amount spent in 2020, and what's the proposed budget and forecast for 2021? I think these are reactive meetings right now. I think that we should have been looking at this a long time ago. And it's sad that we've come to this, but I am happy that we are having this conversation. So I yield my time. Thank you.
Thank you, Dana. Danielle?
Hi, good morning, everyone. Myself, Dominic, and Rayquan are using our combined time to read a prepared statement. So Councilor, President Campbell, Committee Chair Wu, and members of the Boston City Council, thank you for the opportunity to join you at this committee hearing. I am Danielle, Recruitment and Intake Manager at More Than Words, joined by my coworker Dominic, who is also a Recruitment and Intake Manager, as well as Rayquan Gibbons, a youth partner. More Than Words is a nonprofit social enterprise that empowers youth to take charge of their lives by taking charge of a business. Young adults earn a job running book businesses. They are out on a fleet of trucks, sourcing books and selling them in their online, retail, wholesale, and pop-up shop businesses, generating $4 million in earned revenue while developing critical skills approximately 20 hours a week. They also have a second job, their U job, where they receive intensive case management to work towards personal goals. 2 years of continued support in our career services program helps our youth transition to other jobs and persistent education. We serve a diverse population of young people, often overlooked and underfunded in anti-gang and violence prevention initiatives. Our young people are 16 to 24 years old and in the child welfare system, in diversion programs, experiencing homelessness or out of school, and over 40% of them have court involvement. We work closely with the Suffolk County District Attorney's Office and CPCS to help ensure our youth get back on track when they are justice involved, including through a grant-funded partnership to implement joint training on the developmental needs of emerging adults. We are also strong and loud advocates of raise the age on the juvenile justice system, which is critical to supporting our young people to get back on track. We know this age group has the highest recidivism rate. I can describe this to you more, but the best way is for you to hear from what our young people need directly, which is why I yield my time to one of our young adult partners, Rayquan Gibbons.
Hello, everybody. My name is Rayquan Gibbons, and I'm a partner at More Than Words. When I got shot, I teamed up with Boston Commission, and my caseworker from there got me connected with More Than Words. But personally, I have family and friends who worked here before me. At first, I thought it was just a kiddie job, but they teach us real skills. It's an opportunity for me to get back on my feet, and also a great opportunity for young people to stay off the streets. It's also an opportunity to help us run the business on our own. The job is important because it teaches us independence and prepares us for the real world. It teaches us how to be professional and business savvy. The youth development side is also important because we can work on our personal goals and plan for education and a career. My goal now is to find a purpose in a career, not just a job. In general, here in Boston, youth need more support. Youth in the city deserve as much support and resources as kids in the suburbs get. We need people to help us network and we need to know people in power have our backs. And that's it.
Hi, I am Dominic. I'm the recruitment and intake manager at More Than Words as well. So I'm just going to finish off and end with us. To chart and empower and positive future, our youth must overcome a wide array of challenges, including failing public systems of care, unaddressed traumas and mental health issues, community violence, generational poverty, and persistent racism in a culture of white supremacy. The COVID-19 crisis has created an overlay of additional difficulties for our young people to navigate. Gun violence has increased by 30% during COVID. The job market has tightened. Just 7 More Than Words graduates started new jobs in the final quarter of FY 20, as compared to 82 for the rest of the year. Our career service team is helping youth to navigate the job market with one-to-one coaching, resume, and cover letter resources, and helping them with application. Food insecurities has increased during the pandemic, and the technology gap of our young people face is particularly damaging in isolated worlds. More Than Words has distributed more than 700 bags of groceries to youth and families, 34 laptops, and 14 cell phones to our youth. We also pay our young people through this crisis, distributing more than $50,000 each month in wages to help youth and their families with expenses. Isolation and challenging home situations have intensified. We continue deep virtual programming and have now reopened physically for youth to come back onto the site, critical to helping them move through the challenging times. We are grateful to be supported by the City of Boston for this critical work through violence prevention funding in the Youth Development Fund and SSYI and job training funding like the Neighborhood Job Trust and the City Workforce and Invocations and Opportunities Act regulations. We also receive state funding, including government gun violence prevention funding for the Department of Public Health. However, despite our focus on specific serving public systems involved in homeless youth, government funding only accounts for 17% of our budget. While the social enterprise business run by the young people themselves covers over 40%, our young people need more from all of us. Even in a year of budgeting crunch, We must increase city funding for asset-based opportunities for young people. Opportunities, stability, hope, and jobs are the most important, powerful interrupters of violence. We and community organizations like us have increased our services during COVID to be here for our young people. Now more than ever, we need to invest in our people and community. It is simply hard to get your life on track if you don't have a place to stay, adults who believe in your potential and willing to go to bat for you, opportunities for our training and education, and the chance to make a mistake and learn without closing the door on their futures. Thank you for considering us.
Thank you very much. So we really appreciate everyone who signed up for public testimony. That concludes those who signed up in advance. Again, for anyone watching, if you feel moved to testify, you can reach out to the council and sign up. It's Michelle with 2 L's .a.goldberg@boston.gov, and you can get the link to testify. So now we will move to the administration panel. I see we are being joined by a few more colleagues as well. I want to recognize Councilor Ricardo Arroyo for joining. Let me see if there's anyone else that I missed. Okay, Councilor Arroyo, did you want to give a very brief opening statement as we're moving on?
Just very briefly, violence prevention is obviously incredibly important, and I look forward to hearing from the panel, and thank you for chairing this today. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so we will go to the panel. I have in my records that it will be Chief of Health and Human Services, Marty Martinez, Director of the Mayor's Office of Public Safety, Rufus Falk, Commissioner BCYF, Will Morales, Director of SOAR Boston, Talia Rivera, Director of Violence Prevention at the Boston Public Health Commission, Katherine Fine, Boston Police Superintendent of Night Command, Gerard Bailey, Director SSYI Coordinator, Frank DeLuca, and Tierney will manage the PowerPoint. I'm also told that Reverend Mark Scott and Director Roy Martin will be on hand for questions. So we hope full complement of everyone. Okay, Tierney, are you good with the presentation? Perfect.
Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Councilor Wu, Councilor Arroyo, Councilor Campbell, Councilor Flynn, Councilor Mejia, and Councilor Bach. Thank you for giving us an opportunity to sort of talk to you a little bit about what we're trying to do, and love to share some information with you all and be brief so we can get to questions as well across the board. And want you to hear not only what we're doing, but what folks on the ground are doing, because there's obviously a lot of folks in the city that are working on the ground every day on these issues. So glad to sort of give you an overview of that. So we want to tell you a little bit about the framework of violence prevention intervention that we have going on. And then, as you heard, we're going to talk to some of the direct work that the administration's taken on, really targeting these services, measuring their impact, and working to reduce crime in the community. So next slide. We address violence through a public health lens, and that has been in the case for some time, and that is focused to ensure that we are taking a public health approach to how we think about violence in the community. And that means we look at it from a prevention, intervention, and response framework that we've been adapting and working through over the past several years. As we reported the last time we were in a hearing together, our goal is to make sure that we're not only just running services and programs and investing in opportunities in the community, but that we're working towards things that we can measure and a framework that allows us to understand what the gaps are and how we can address them. So as we do this, the city's working in these 5 larger buckets. We're working to identify and address the social determinants of violence in our community. We know when someone commits an act of violence in the community, it's not just that act, but all the other causes that go into that. The lack of access to housing, the lack of access to economic opportunity, more and more the inequitable impact of various things that happen in our community then lead to violence. And so we're identifying and addressing social determinants as much as we look at and work specifically around violence. We're trying to create equitable pathways of opportunity for all Bostonians. You're going to hear that thread over the programming that the team is working on, and you're going to see that equitable pathway for folks to have an alternative route to success and an alternative route to opportunity is critical for us as we're looking to address violence in the community. We've also taken on, which has been a feedback that came in when I came into this role 3 years ago, which was really to improve and enhance communication and coordination among city departments. Community residents, organizations, and counselors as well pressed the fact that we needed to improve this, and that is something that we really tackled and took on. From the Office of Public Safety, Boston Public Health Commission, and VCYF, and the Office of Returning Citizens, which are now all under Health and Human Services as together, as well as in partnership with the Boston Police Department, who plays a critical role in this work. We've improved and enhanced communication and coordination. You're going to hear a little bit about that as well. We've worked to build stronger relationships with external community partners. It was great to hear from Rayquan and the team at More Than Words. More Than Words, as was mentioned, an organization along with roughly 60 other organizations that are funded in the community, city funds going directly to these organizations who are working day in and day out with young people on the street and creating opportunities for them and pathways to have alternatives to violence in the community. So we've built a stronger relationship, and you're going to see that through some of the work throughout the organizations. And last but not least is to maximize impact and efficiency while ensuring an effective response to community needs. As someone who spent much of my career in youth development before coming in this role, I know there are lots of great organizations. It doesn't mean that every great organization is doing great work. And so again, part of what we're trying to do is make sure we maximize impact and efficiency along the way. On the next slide, you're going to see just sort of the framework that we take on. And as we mentioned, and I know folks are pretty well equipped, but we want to make sure that everyone understands how we see this work from the administration's perspective. We're focused on prevention, intervention, response, and then recovery from this work. As you know, prevention is our efforts focused on direct activities and programs and policies that are intended to prevent violence. And so we have an array of services, programs, and efforts that go into that prevention bucket. We have less so, but targeted intervention work, which are strategies designed to produce behavior change or improve specific outcomes for targeted populations or communities. When you hear from the Boston Public Health Commission, you're going to see a little bit about where the prevention work is, where the intervention work is, and then where the response work is, which is a critical part for the city to respond to violence. That response element is the approach we take on to sort of reduce the impact of violence in the community and respond to the immediate needs associated with it. You'll hear a little bit about all the important work that the trauma teams are doing, but again, that response piece is central. You try to prevent it, you absolutely try to intervene in it, and then you respond to it in the community. And overall, we know this is important to everyone on this call and everyone in the community. We want to recover from it. So it's not as much just to prevent it or try to stop it, but we need to have ongoing and longer term work to support individuals and neighborhoods and the community as a whole to rebuild after violence occurs, which is a really important piece of this work. So it's this framework that we've been using and working through over the past several years, where we've seen sort of the work and effort be more intentional. It's where we saw the lowest crime rates that we had seen in many years last year. But of course, as has been mentioned, and also by the public, we've seen increased issues this year, which of course has really pushed us to think about what services we're running, what programs we're running, and how we're investing those city dollars. So I'm going to pass it to Rufus Falk. Dr. Falk runs the Mayor's Office of Public Safety, who's really taken the lead around coordination and alignment of this strategy and this work. Dr. Falk?
Thank you, Chief, and good afternoon, councilors. It's an honor to be in front of you again. Again, my role primarily, I'm tasked with that level of coordination in terms of internally, how our city departments and cabinets working together around this space, around violence prevention, community development, but most importantly, being present in those neighborhoods and being present with those individuals who are most vulnerable and in most need of our support. So as you can see, We have broken it down into two buckets in terms of our coordination metrics. And you could read this, you could read the slide, but I just want to make sure, just in terms I provide context. We were doing this pre-COVID, so making sure that as internal entities, we were meeting weekly to discuss what the realities were on the ground. So that is entities from BPD, BPS, our trauma teams, my office, Office of Returning Citizens, and a number of other external partners around what trends were happening currently. So if there was an uptick of violence happening over in the Upton's Corner area, making sure that we were deploying resources and making sure we had assets in that area to address them. But also beyond that, we're making sure we were being strategic with that. So how can we prevent incidents from occurring? So which is why we're making sure we were receiving context on the ground from our city agency, but most importantly from our community members. So on that side, we meet weekly. We get our internal context from entities like SOAR Boston, who are from a city standpoint, they are our contextual experts around violence prevention. They give us the context in terms of where the hotspots are, who are the individuals who we need to make sure we are providing services with, and that also extends to BPS. So we're making sure that from a BPS standpoint, how can we make sure that we're supporting the efforts that they're having within the school, and also recognize that they're a part of our external communities outside of their school buildings. So many of these works deal with meeting weekly, receiving information, receiving where hotspots are, and then on the other side, on the other bucket around response and recovery, we're making sure when an incident does happen that we are covering all the boards, making sure that we have services at the scene, that the services are coordinated, making sure that we're not duplicating efforts, make sure every city department that has a lane is actually filling that lane. So when an incident happens, we receive the update, making sure that our services are on the ground, make sure that we're connected with the family members directly impacted, making sure that we're connected with the community who was also can be directly but also indirectly impacted, make sure that they're receiving trauma supports, and also recognizing if there are gaps in our recovery sponsors, that we can make sure we're closing those gaps. Again, we could bring BPS in with that. We noticed that we had a number of individuals who were being indirectly impacted. We wanted to make sure that they were receiving trauma support. So what BPS added was that if we have an incident happening on Circuit Street. So what BPS did, they ran a map to figure out how many BPS families and students were impacted by the incident, and it was 31 families impacted, and then making sure that they had their school services and clinicians reaching out to those families as well. So we have a system, we have a protocol pre-COVID, post-COVID is important. While we're doing COVID, it's also important to recognize that our service delivery didn't stop. We were still outside. We were still making sure that we were being present within the community. So if there were groups of individuals congregating at Charter Park, we were making sure that we were there and being present. Also recognizing that the population that we serve, their first fear isn't COVID-19. Their first fear is being a victim of gun violence. So recognizing that the population that we're serving is not really changing their behavior, despite the fact that we're in a pandemic. So just in terms of our level of service delivery, just making sure that we were present, making sure that it's coordinated and it's also strategic, and also recognize that we can make sure we're taking context not only from our internal work, but making sure we're including the expertise of our external and community partners. Next slide. And that, again, this goes in terms of alignment. We want to make sure that the funds that we're allocating are going to address gaps, recognizing that, as Chief mentioned, we have a lot of entities who are doing great work. We want to make sure that we are supporting those entities that are doing great work so they can increase their bandwidth, and ensuring that the efforts that we are funding are coordinated with our overall message and our overall framework. So there is a level of synergy that is happening between the efforts internally, the funding that we are providing, and the community-based work that are happening and that we're supporting. Also recognizing that if we laid over a map of the neighborhoods most impacted by COVID-19, those are the neighborhoods most directly impacted by gun violence. Recognizing those neighborhoods are predominantly Black and brown communities. As somebody born and raised in the city who still lives on Humboldt Avenue, and recognizing that this isn't just a 2020 issue. This has been an issue my whole 38 years of life, but we were making momentum, we're making great steps, and we're going to continue to do so. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Is that the whole presentation from the administration?
Nope.
Oh, okay.
Catherine, go ahead. You're on mute, Catherine.
Thank you, Chief Martinez. My name is Katherine Fine. I'm with the Division of Violence Prevention at the Boston Public Health Commission. I am going to read some comments and then defer to the slides. I will keep my comments brief to create opportunity for questions, but do want to make some acknowledgements. So thank you, Councillor Campbell, Councillor Wu, Councillor Mejia, Councillor Bach, Councillor Flynn, and Arroyo for being here. I just want to acknowledge, as the public health employee, that we come before you, and as others have said, in the midst of overlapping public health crises, the COVID-19 pandemic, the epidemic of racialized violence in our city, and the insidious and intergenerational impacts of systemic racism, all of which have deeply and inequitably impacted Black, Indigenous, and communities of color in Boston and across the country. We come to this hearing today in support of Black Lives Matter and solidarity with families in Boston and the country who are suffering as a result of systemic racism designed and perpetuated by white people and maintained and enforced through structures of power and violence, including state-sanctioned violence. And we want to thank the Council for your leadership and the opportunity to share our work with you today. I want to acknowledge my white privilege in this space and share with you an overview of the work of the division. There are about 20 outstanding public health staff in the Division of Violence Prevention who work really hard to make Boston a safer place to live, to address the trauma caused by community violence, and to support young people and residents to take leadership and a role in violence prevention. My colleagues in the division are on this space with us and also in the community space and can answer questions if you have those specific questions. And I also just want to take a moment to acknowledge the leadership of our staff, of the community, and of our partners during this unprecedented time. And including the partners on this panel at the city level. They've acted with enormous courage and wisdom and care as they've led their programs through really unexpected and transformative change during this time. And there is more we can do, and we can always do better, but we come to you with really open hearts and minds this afternoon. So I want to defer back to the slides and just share with you our strategic framework in the commission. This is a framework that we go by that does line up with the overall HHS framework. We really prioritize partnerships at all levels, and we believe that in order to do our work, we have to work with community and residents and be working with them side by side with them in this work. We promote policies that promote social justice and health equity and access to resources. Our goal is for our providers, partners, and systems to have trauma-informed policies and practices, and for us to have the capacity to support that. And we do a lot of youth development work, both within the Division of Violence Prevention and across the Commission, really supporting the healthy relationships and supporting young people to have voice in what healthy relationships and violence prevention means. And then we really aim for a shared understanding of the root causes of violence, including and naming racism as a root cause. Going into the slides of our programs, this is just a highlight. We have details about our budget and details about the allocation, and we can go into more detail on that in the question and answer session. But just to give you an overview, violence intervention and prevention is a prevention program that we have. It's grounded in community-based organizations in 6 neighborhoods across the city of Boston. Their goal is really on community mobilizing, raising community voice, taking action against violence, and working to build both capacity and youth development strategies at the neighborhood level. Next slide. Our capacity building and training initiative was an initiative started with funds many years ago now from the Department of Justice, and that we have now made a full city initiative. This program offers a menu of training and capacity building options that address multiple forms of trauma and promote health equity and racial and gender justice and through a broader kind of life course perspective. And we offer a whole host of trainings, and the staff on this team are really very focused on tailoring trainings, tailoring strategies to support organizations to become trauma informed in ways that really work with the organizations that they're trying to support. So these are not out of the box training. Some of them are kind of more routine trainings that we offer, and some are very tailored and specific. Next slide. You can go to the next slide. Start Strong. So this is one of 2 youth development programs that we have. We have one in our VIP program. This is a program that works with young people through a healthy relationship and teen dating violence prevention curriculum. They also conduct workshops in community-based organizations and create very innovative media and technology tools to support conversations around healthy relationships. Both of these teams are part of an annual summer program that we host every year. The VIP program and Start Strong program had an unbelievable virtual summer with young people. We'd love the opportunity to come and talk to anybody more about how that was done and what we learned. Next slide, please. Next slide. A Safe and Successful Youth Initiative, that's a state-funded initiative. It's been part of the division also for a number of years. This is and works in conjunction with other city, state partners and within the context of Health and Human Services. This is a program really aimed at 17 to 24-year-olds who are identified as being at risk of gang or gun violence. We offer intensive case management support, connection to education, employment services, and connection to behavioral health services. And Roy Martin is on the space this afternoon to answer more questions about that. Next slide, please. And finally, the Neighborhood Trauma Team Network. This initiative started, I'd say about 3 years ago now. It has now grown to a network of 19 community-based organizations. We include ourselves in that count, which is really, our goal has been to develop a network of providers so that the city can offer a continuum of services specifically around immediate response, outreach, and recovery services related to community violence. And we are not the only people in this space. We partner very intentionally with SOAR and others, and value those partnerships and the incredible and important work that's happening across the city. Next slide, please. So I do want to name and be happy to answer questions. We did receive $1 million, a little bit more than $1 million that went mostly to the neighborhood trauma teams as a result of a reallocation of budget money from the police department. We'd be happy to share with you how that money has been allocated if you would like to, and have a slide to answer those questions as well. And I think this is finally, the Family Justice Center of Boston is a community of agencies. These are nonprofits who work in the domestic violence, sexual assault, and sexual exploitation space. They have space over at the Family Justice Center in Brighton that is shared space with the Boston Police Department. These are free services in order to meet the needs of clients who are impacted by those forms of violence. They also do a lot of training, education, and public awareness activities as a collaborative together. Next slide. So that's a summary. We have a lot of information. I'm very happy to answer any questions that you might have.
This is Will Morales. If you have any questions, I want to thank all the city councilors for making this forum available in this hearing, and it's so very important. In regards to sort of the work that VCYF does, and I'm actually waiting for the slide to come up, we live in a world of prevention. I think VCYF was established over 40 years ago on a grassroots nature that we've worked in partnership with a lot of community partners to basically identify what the community gaps were in regards to the needs of not only youth, but also families and some of the challenges that they've had in their communities. As you're very much aware, we operate in about 36 community centers. We're in every nook and cranny and neighborhood in the city of Boston. And we normally operate in neighborhoods that sometimes are the hardest to engage, and we engage sometimes the most toughest populations in regards. But a lot of our work has changed recently. And when we're looking at the uptake of violence, understand that it's not that the city has stopped doing anything. Understand that also our partners and their capacity to do more, has changed too as well. And sometimes they've had gaps that they've been trying to fill. So, the connecting with our young people in somewhat has been sort of disrupted because of COVID. But I think that a lot of us are still committed to figuring out, if we can't physically connect with them, how do we do it through various different platforms? And so at VCYF, that's where we've been instituting since day one. We've been in operation since COVID has happened, with the intention to make sure that we continue to do as much as we can for the families and especially for the youth to participate in our program under a COVID reality. Just to give you sort of a brief summary is that we continue to make sure that we target populations that are specifically more vulnerable sometimes in the youth realm, especially those 12, 13, and 14-year-olds that are trying to find their way, but sometimes find their way to a street corner versus coming into a community center. In partnership with SOAR and with some other organizations, we make sure that we try to expand our reach and ensure that those young people find their ways to our doors, understanding that majority of the work that VCYF does has no cost. So we make sure that cost does not become an inhibiting factor for young people to come in through our doors and participate in our programs. Just this summer alone, and it's not keeping it specific to the summer, Super Teens, our program, one of our anchor summer programs, increased its capacity to serve more young people between the ages of 13 and 14 years of age. And this is the youth population that sometimes does not have as many opportunities. If there was a traditional summer camp program, they would have aged out, but they're not, they're also too young to participate in any summer employment program. This provides them with a pre-employment program, but most importantly, it provides them with an opportunity to connect with a consistent, caring adult. Understanding that one of the biggest sort of deterrents that young people, one of the biggest assets that young people can have is connecting to a mentor. We ensure that through this initiative called the Super Teens. And I really want to thank all the city councilmen, all the city councils that participated in a sort of forum that we had and an engagement with the Super Teens. I know that Julie Maia was definitely a part of that. And the exchange was very wonderful to see our young people be able to have access to their city councilors and have that healthy exchange. I think that what we saw is that we sparked some aspirations there for them to continue to look at what a life of service could be. We're also very specific in looking at gender and the role that it plays. Sometimes when we think of violence or we think about those who are engaged in so unhealthy behaviors, we sometimes narrow it down to the boys, but the reality is that we've seen a resurgence in how the girls also play a role in that. And we want to make sure that we also provide programming and services that are specific to young women and about what their role is about being healthy themselves, but how do they also contribute to making a much healthier community in regards to that. A lot of our prevention work is also not done alone. Our spaces are very much open to a lot of community grassroots organization. We've worked with Monica Gannon on some initiatives. We've worked with Rufus, not only in his role with the city, but prior to the city. We always make our spaces available to support a lot of local small grassroots organizations or even just individuals who are thinking, have a great idea and want to implement it and sometimes just need the space and small resources to get it out of the way. So a lot of our partnerships that tend to happen are really sort of grassroots level, and we play a very crucial role in making sure that we support those organizations and having access to those resources. We continue to work very diligently with the Boston Police Department and especially now with the Bureau of Community Engagement. Nora Baston actually lives in our spaces most of the time. And prior to COVID, hosted a series of a lot of girls athletic, empowering kind of workshops that were happening. and it's changed a little bit, but we're looking at how do we reintroduce it now that some of the state guidelines have made it possible to make those kind of connections to continue. We also work with the Boston Fire Department in regards to creating more connections in regards to Teen Fire Academy that they had this summer, and making the referrals and connecting young people who are looking for opportunities with us, and connecting them back to them in regards to that. One of the things that happened too is that we know with the state of COVID, a lot of the organizations weren't able to support young people with youth employment this year. And so what BCYF did is that we've increased our allotment to over, I think, an additional 230 more young people. And so we supported over 600 kids with employment opportunities, and we supported them through an extension that DYE had, because we knew it was very important not only to get young people employed, but most importantly, to kind of keep them engaged and connected to adults. And so, that was a very rewarding experience for all, and it's one of the roles that we continue to play in doing those things. We hope to extend our program menu way into the fall. One of the things that we've had to do is reinvent ourselves. So now we have these online programs, and we also have these in-person programs. But because of the state of COVID, now we have to do this sort of pre-registration. But one of the great things about pre-registration is that we're able to now capture more information on our young people: cell phone numbers, emails. You know what I mean? Get to know them a little bit differently through a very virtual space that sometimes we didn't have before. It makes it very interesting. But at the same time, we can see that a lot of young people continue to repeat and sign up for various classes and various opportunities that BCYF continues to offer. And one of the things that we do is that we continue to invest more in our spaces, especially our teen-friendly spaces. In the next couple of years, we're going to be redoing a couple of our facilities over. One of them is, of course, the Curley Community Center. That's going to get a major overhaul that we hope it to become sort of not only a hub for South Boston, but a hub for all the city of Boston, and where we'll probably provide more opportunities for young people and for families there. But we made some initial other investments too as well, as we found that not every young person had a Google Chromebook. Not every kid goes to the Boston Public School and was able to get one. So we made some additional purchases and provided them to some of our super teen kids who had the technology kind of gap, and kind of fill that. And of course, we invested in some specialized equipment so that when we do the in-person programming, we're able to do it sort of in a safe and in a very safe environment. Some of the critical support elements that we did is that, even though COVID came on board, we continue to feed families. We provided over 190,000 meals, but that provided us also an opportunity to connect with those families and to listen to their concerns. And while we listened to their concerns, we began to start thinking about how can we best support them. We provided over 2,000 family care packages to families that were looking for activities and things that they can do with their younger children, and did that. We secured an additional $90,000 in additional new funding that allowed us to expand our Super Teens program. And one of the things that we've been doing is that prior to COVID, we had a very strong interest in working, especially with the late Bill McGonigal, about opening a sort of teen center inside the Mildred Haley housing development. And today, the foundation for BCYF, which is sort of a funding arm for BCYF, has placed 2 additional youth workers there who continue to work with the young people there to provide them with more ample opportunities, but most importantly, because they're connected to BCYF, they're also connected to the resources of BCYF and the city of Boston. And what it does, it makes it a big difference when there's a presence there, when they have an individual or youth workers that the young people there can actually turn to, who are immediately there to support them with any issues that they may have or any opportunities for growth. One of the things that we're continuing to do as we continue to emerge and look at where we're at now, we want to expand more training opportunities, especially for all our BCYF staff. We're living in a virtual world now, and we have to think about what opportunities we can do to continue to connect young people more frequently and provide and get more access to them, but they can also have access to us as quickly as possible. One of the things we're going to be looking also is to look at how do we expand more, deepen our relationship more with BPD and the Bureau of Community Engagement and SOAR, and to think about how do they use our standalone buildings into the early evenings. thinking about maybe job readiness opportunities for some of the impact players in the city of Boston who sometimes don't feel comfortable traveling around the city and what they can do. And then some of the other things that we're also thinking about doing is looking at SOAR and our VCYF youth workers, looking at how can we can enhance skill sets, but most importantly, how can they together do more outreach? Because knowing that SOAR Boston works with the impact players, what we found is that the impact players have little brothers and sisters who are sometimes not involved or engaged in that kind of lifestyle. But the reality is that what we found is when you talk to those impact players, they don't want their little brothers and sisters involved in that lifestyle. So we think that by having them go out and do outreach together and make the connections, those young people will be able to come to our doors because they'll have a familiar face on the other side of it. And I think that's it for us. If there's any questions, I'm willing to entertain any now.
Very much to our panel from the administration. I wanted to recognize that Councillor Michael Flaherty and Councillor Anissa Sapi-George had joined us as well. Let's see if there, and I have gotten a note. Okay, so we have one other person signed up for public testimony that we will get to after Q&A with councillors. So we'll go straight into questions in the order that we had listed earlier for councillors, and then finish the public testimony, and then panel number 2.
Councillor?
Is Tali, I think, going to related to SOAR Boston?
Yeah, I just wanted to reference Tali Rivera is going to present on SOAR.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Thanks, Councillor Wu.
Again, my name's Talia Rivera. I'm the director of SOAR Boston, which is an acronym for Street Outreach, Advocacy, and Response. SOAR Boston is formerly known as the Street Workers Program. It's a gang intervention program at the Boston Centers for Youth and Families. Last year, the city of Boston made a significant investment in SOAR Boston to redesign its program model and increase personnel so that we're able to improve our impact and outcomes. SOAR's purpose is simple. Our job really is to help young people change their life course trajectory. Our target population are between the ages of 14 to 24. However, we do service adults that range from 25 to 32 who meet one of the following criterias. So the youth and young adults that we're engaging are repeatedly engaged in violence, is an influencer in a gang, and or driving violence in the streets. Next slide. There are 3 components of our program strategy. The first one, street outreach. We have assigned and deployed 24 outreach and engagement coordinators to specific areas in the city to build deep, authentic relationships with gang-involved youth and young adults from 41 of the most active and violent gangs across the city. Through our advocacy work, we have a team right now of 4 resource coordinators who are cultivating relationships with companies and corporations to create a pipeline for employment opportunities in industries like customer service, hospitality, and warehousing. And I'm excited to report that we recently secured several partnerships with AutoZone, Jiffy Lube, AT&T, and Flour Bakery. However, we're looking to develop relationships with corporations like your UPS and Amazons that offer career growth opportunities for the young adults that we work with who are a little bit more advanced and have the skill set to do work with those kinds of companies. In addition to that, our resource coordinators also facilitate access to services in healthcare, mental health, housing, and education. For example, probably about 2 months ago, there was a young man who was shot, thankfully not to his demise, but he didn't have health insurance, and he left the hospital with a $2,000 bill. And our resource coordinators were able to get him enrolled in Mass Health and was able to get the bill back paid. And lastly, our resource coordinators are also advocates for individuals who are involved in criminal justice matters as well. Our final program component is response, and in partnership with the Boston Public Health Commission's Neighborhood Trauma Team Network, We respond to gang-related acts of violence to diffuse retaliatory incidents from occurring, and when possible, mediate disputes between rival gangs. Next slide. And I just wanted to give you a sense of what we're dealing with in the city, and this may not be new to many folks, but there are roughly 160 self-identified gangs in Boston. 100 of those gangs are active, meaning they're present but quiet, they're dormant. Some of those 100 gangs represents groups that have been longstanding fixtures in our communities for decades, like a Castlegate, a Columbia Road, Interville, and Columbia Point. They are not actively driving violence right now, but they are there, and they're groups that we're constantly paying attention to. Of the 100 gangs, there are roughly anywhere between 30 to 45 that are actively driving violence in the city right now. There are 5,300 total individuals, 2,800 are considered active, and the remaining 2,500 are classified as inactive, either deceased or long-term incarcerated. From the 2,800 active gang members, SOAR Boston has developed and created a roster where they identified 360 core influencers that we are targeting. One of our underlying assumptions is that if we target the most influential drivers of violence, that their peers will follow. And I've seen that. You know, I've been doing this work for a very long time, and I've seen evidence of that. Next slide. Our program goals for 2020 are to outreach to those 360 gang-involved youth and young adults, as I mentioned earlier, to really build a deep, authentic relationship with them. And we want to contact and connect with 100% of our roster by September 2020. And we're close. So right now we are at 206 of the 360. Part of the reason we haven't met the whole 360 is that we have 4 vacant outreach and engagement coordinator positions right now. And then we have a couple of outreach and engagement coordinators who are out on leave. We also are looking to broker services for the 360 gang-involved youth and young adults that we're targeting. And you can see the bullets there on how we plan to do that. And then our last goal for 2020 is to facilitate conflict resolution mediation to 24 gangs in the city of Boston. Next slide. So this is just a map, and this is not a secret to us. We know where most of the violence is happening in our community. But this first map represents the territories in the city that are occupied by gangs. And you can see their proximity to each other. You know, they're sharing the same corner stores, the same mom and pop restaurants, schools, hospitals, you name it, right? It's like, you know, we have gangs that are 2 and 3 streets over from each other, which leads to this second map that shows that roughly half of this year's homicides and non-fatal shootings took place in relatively 3.42 square miles. So it's condensed, you know, it's condensed to Roxbury, Dorchester, and Mattapan. More recently, we've been seeing an uptick in places like Rosendale, also East Boston. But our outreach and engagement coordinators are paying attention to those trends as well. But we're confident that our purpose and our strategy to help gang-involved youth and young adults change their life course trajectory will result in a reduction of gang-related activity in our city. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Am I missing anyone else from the administration? Any other pieces of the presentation? Good. Okay, great. So we'll go now to Q&A from counselors, starting with Counselor Andrea Campbell.
Thank you, Council Wu, and I'll be mindful of time so we can get to panel 2 and save questions for additional rounds. First of all, thank you to all of you guys for the presentation. Of course, thank you for the work you guys do every single day. I know it's not easy, and I appreciate you guys coming back to the table to continue this conversation based on the hearing that I held in Mattapan, so thank you. Just quickly, and this is through the chair, if we could get copies of this presentation that was given, that'd be great. And then I have some questions I'm going to go through and frame some just as requests through the chair just to save time. So one of the things is obviously with respect to the monies. So every department can play a role in violence prevention, intervention, and recovery, and has different funding, amounts of funding and sources of funding. So if we could get a list of the amounts of funding that were spent under or for violence prevention, intervention, and recovery by each department. Not only the total monies, but who administered it, where it came from, and who oversaw those funding, that would be helpful. My question related to it is, this is based on the previous hearing, has there been any progress in making this information that I'm requesting available publicly on the City of Boston's website? That's my first question. My second question is, Catherine's presentation, and I know she went through it quickly, had some metrics in there as to how they measure their success. Talia, am I saying your name correctly? Talia also had some metrics in there too, just outreach numbers. Are there any, what are the metrics, or if we could get what other departments are using in terms of their metrics that measure their success, that would be helpful. That continues to be a question. If you're spending X dollars on this program, what are your goals? What are you trying to reach? I know some are data driven, some are maybe through qualitative stories or something like that. That would be helpful too, and I can request that through the chair. And then I guess my second question is, after the progress on making that information available on the website, SOAR, going back to SOAR, which is so critical, we're talking about the violence. It's typically, in many respects, not to discount the need to serve our young people, and Commissioner Morales got to that, 12, 14, I'll come back to that, but really those who define themselves as gang involved, that harder to reach older population, we've often talked about that being a challenge. SOAR is attempting to do that work, but frankly, it sounded similar to the SSYI work, which is they had, for a long time, a list of 300 influencers, trying to give them resources, stipending, of course, organizations as well. So I'm curious how SOAR works with SSYI. When SOAR gets, once a SOAR outreach person does their outreach to folks in the community, and they hear back from that person, do they then refer that person to the organizations within SSYI? Who is referring to what? Can you just walk us through that process of where SOAR and SSYI are similar, where they're different? Because it sounds similar, so I'm just curious about that piece. So I guess there's two questions. Sorry for the confusion. The first is progress in making these funding sources available online on our City of Boston's website. And then specifically to SOAR, what does our referral process look like? What does our outreach process look like? And how do we work with SSYI in the process?
I'll take the budget question, Counselor. So last year was the first year that I think, since I've been in this role, where we were requested to look at that data in terms of what was being spent. I think it might have come up 2 years ago, but last year was the first year that was sort of raised up. We then did work with budget going into this year to sort of map that data out. So what you're asking for in terms of total spent and sort of how it's administered, I think we have that information through budget. We did not, I don't think it's been published anywhere online, but we're glad to make it as transparent as possible. So I'll circle with budget on that, because they're the ones that collected that across the administration about where that lived. So we can circle on that front. And then I would guess Talia and Roy, you guys making the distinction, because it would be clear. So Talia.
Yeah. So as far as us working together, the SSYI list and our roster list overlaps. SSYI services, I believe, 17 to roughly 24. We're servicing 14 to roughly about 32. So a lot of the young people who are aging out of SSYI, we're still working with. And as far as referrals concerned, we like to look at ourselves as well as an intermediary, because we don't have direct programming. So, like for instance, we have a young man who we just recently got positioned with through our partnership with AutoZone. He's a young man that's on the SSYI list. So because he's working, we'll refer him to SSYI so that he's able to get services there as well. But there's some overlap, but our work is very different. It looks very different. We are working with gangs. SSYI is working with individuals. Roy, I don't know what you want to add to that.
Roy, you want to add anything?
I don't see Roy. Roy, are you there? I don't see her. Catherine?
Yeah, I'm here. Apparently, some of this is, as mentioned, there's some intent to refer this individual that they're discussing to us. I can't speak to SOAR's model,
Well, I guess my only thing is because, obviously I'm in my 5th year on the council. My first hearing was on the SSYI and Shannon grant, looking at those monies specifically on SSYI and really pulling apart the history of that. And of course, Roy, we've talked about this numerous times, along with organizations that get the funding, on how you really reach those who are gang involved, those folks who are tough to reach in order to really prevent and intervene violence. And we talked about how you hire more people who can reach those individuals and needing to resource that. And then once you are able to build that trusting relationship, where do you refer them to? So I know SOAR was we wanted to redo the street worker program, and I get that. There was a lot of concerns related to that program and its efficiency. So when I see that SOAR is working with sort of a similar age range, maybe it's not a quite overlap. I'm curious as to why not leave some of that work to SSYI and then look at the age group that isn't touched by SSYI. It just seems to be more efficient if those programs merged. And yes, I hear you working with individuals versus gangs. I see them as connected, right? If an individual is part of a gang, they're connected. And so I think about, are we losing any resources by duplicating efforts, or just how that works in greater partnerships? I was just taken.
Yeah. And also, Councilor Campbell, I feel like the other way our work is different is like we currently have right now 31 full-time employees with 11 vacancies. So we're a department of 42 when we're fully staffed, and we're relatively 40 people in the community. So we're out there from 1 p.m. to 9 p.m. Just this weekend, we were out there to roughly 3 in the morning. That's not the work that SSYI does. It's very different. It's very different.
So if we could get the list of who the outreach folks are, I think that would be useful to all counselors to know that, right? Who's in their respective districts and communities working on the ground. I do think this just reminds me of a conversation that was started in the previous hearing too, which is how, I don't know if it's an office, I know Rufus, frankly, I'm like, get Rufus a budget, get him some more resources, human capital, but how do you coordinate all these moving pieces? You have Health Commission, SSYI, SOAR, HHS, right? Office of Public Safety. Just a better coordination, I think, is critical from folks who are on the outside looking in, because it can be confusing, frankly.
So I'll let you speak to that. Will you also talk about the multi-case management stuff that we're doing as well?
Yeah, so just to sort of...
Thank you.
I think we could do a better job at the sort of external messaging, but internally that coordination does happen. So for instance, if we meet weekly to determine a way in which the most need is, but most importantly, we're making sure that we're not duplicating these efforts, because like you said, we have departments that have a lane, and we want to make sure that every effort is connected, and we're making sure that not only internally we do it externally. So we meet weekly with DYS, with BPS, so Suffolk County DA's office, to make sure that we're identifying those individuals who are those juvenile individuals who need that extra level of support, and make sure that we're referring them out. And we're making sure that we meet weekly with our trauma teams, making sure that the trauma teams are being deployed exactly where they need to go, and we're supporting them in every area where all the gaps are happening. So that level of coordination does happen in terms of where our services go and who we're working with, and making sure every initiative knows what each other is doing, that those efforts do happen. But I think I agree with you. We should do a better job at externally making sure that process is fully explained, and we're actually in the process of doing so, making sure that level of information is available to not only to your staff, but more importantly to the community, that they know.
I'll add, just because I'm looking at time, I'm sure Councilor Wu will jump to the next person, one, obviously it's important to work with those folks gang involved, the individuals. Of course, want to raise up the families and those who are connected to those individuals too, which is critically important. I think people on panel 2 are going to speak to that as well. And on the metrics or accountability that help us keep everyone accountable, would love, and this is maybe for you, Chief Martinez, on the funding piece, thank you. On the metrics piece, I did see a lot of that in some of the presentations, but not with respect to everything. I think that is helpful too, and how do we deem we're successful? And then my last question is, obviously you show me that map, which was very depressing, I will tell you, because that's my district. I got Dorchester and Mattapan, biggest neighborhoods, and I talk to you guys all the time, separately, most of the time, of where the violence and uptick in violence is happening. And there's an uptick, right? Whether we like it or not, there's an uptick. So I really would love to hear, where are we getting it wrong, right? Clearly some things are not working, right? And so where are we getting wrong, where we need to do better? And I know COVID is bringing, and what's happening with racism in this country, trauma, mental health, you name it. I don't have all the answers. I do try to connect with some folks who are part of just some awful cases, frankly, to get a greater and deeper understanding. It's not my lane, but clearly there is an uptick and a lot of questions from community on where can we be doing better, where we're not. And I'll leave with that question before I then go to my colleagues, and then I can come back around.
Can I so I would offer that, you're right, Councilor. There's an uptick here, and BPD is also on the call, and I think they've been, working on the coordination side also with Rufus's work. I think it's important to note, and for all councilors, that there's an uptick in violence in almost every major city right now. And I think that's an important distinction to be clear, that COVID has created a scenario where there's been services that are less accessible. There's been people out of work. There's been people battling and trying to deal with financial survival. And then there's just the expression of so many folks also being isolated and then dealing with some of the mental health issues that are playing out during COVID. So there's no question that COVID has exacerbated it. To the point that you're raising, though, Councilor, I think the coordination piece has been extremely critical. And so I think in past times when there's been a lot more direct engagement, one of the things we've seen here and other cities have articulated as well is the need to really double down on what we're seeing, and the need to really make sure that someone who might not be an impact player doesn't become one in times like this. And that's been part of the challenge that I'll say SOAR and public safety have seen, that there's been young people that are nowhere near being on the SSYI list and not familiar with the work that SSYI does, but that are getting engaged and involved in activities that are of concern and driving some violence in the community. So we've seen more of that, which has then seen some uptick, which has then forced us to sort of try to look at that coordination in better alignment with the police department. But I think you're absolutely right. The uptick that we're seeing here really has required some intentional focus, which is why that team's been meeting weekly and then really coordinating in advance of holiday weekends, in advance of Carnival, in advance of all the things that we know can sometimes drive violence in the community. So no singular answer to it, but I think it's been a combination of things that have put us in the scenario we're in today. Talia, I mean, you sort of seen some of it on the ground. I don't know if you want to jump in there.
Yeah, I think I'll add to that. I mean, it's not a secret that the street workers program has not been the most effective, hence why the mayor made the investment to redesign the model. So another huge factor where I felt like previous to this change was that all the street workers were not connected to the right kids, right? So that's another huge problem, right? The only way that we can engage this population is that we have to know them. So now, I mean, things are a lot different. You know, now we have goals, objectives set in place. We have expectations for our outreach and engagement coordinators, and we're holding them accountable to that. So, and I think that we'll start to see a difference in the work that we're doing in community, you know, and I think there's this misconception that a lot of our kids want to do what they're doing. They don't, right? A perfect example is probably maybe 2 months ago, a young man who I'd worked with for probably over 10 years was murdered. I had another young man as part of the same group call me on Facebook, like via Facebook Live. And he shows me, he's upset, he's crying. He shows me his gun and he tells me, he's like, listen, like, I'm about to go handle this, right? So my thing is, okay, you're about to go handle this. Why are you calling me? Why are you telling me that? Right? The reality is that you don't want to do that, because if you did, you wouldn't call me, you would just go do it. So what I was able to do is say, stay where you are. I'm coming to where you are. And we're working to get in all of our outreach and engagement coordinators to the place where instead of a kid picking up the gun and going and retaliating, that they say, you know what? Let me call my outreach and engagement coordinator first, right? But the only way that happens is if we have this deep, authentic relationship that I'm talking about. And so we are at the beginning of that. And so what I would say to you is to give us a little bit more time, because although I've been in this position for a year, we've spent probably about 3 years going through union negotiations. So literally, I would say that the official redesign of our model really did not take place until July. So I mean, I would say just, you know, bear with us, give us some time, but I guarantee that you'll start to see a change in community. And this is the other thing. The other thing that I really want to shift about our work is that our job is not to stop shootings, because if we could, we would, right? I think it's a unrealistic expectation to say that as outreach and engagement coordinators, we need shootings to stop. What I feel like our work is to help young people change their lives. And as we do that, we'll see a reduction in firearm-related offenses and gang-related activity in community. So I just give us some time, you know, give us some time. And I guarantee that you'll start to see a difference in the lives of the young people that we work with.
I don't know if we've lost Councilor Wu.
You say, Councilor Campbell, I was just going to start to move us
Okay,
along.
good. Yeah, go ahead. I can say more for the next round. Thank you.
Great. Yeah, I want to give our lead sponsors all the time that they need. So I wasn't going to cut you both off, but I will keep the rest of us to a more strict limit. So Councilor Mejia, the floor is yours.
Thank you. So before I even start with my questions, I just want to acknowledge two things. One is that in 1992, yes, Talia, I'm going to put you out there. I was doing my internship at the Boys and Girls Club in the South End with Gerald Casey, and you were a young person at the time working in that space. And while we were there was a shootout that happened, and we had to go underneath the table. That was in 1992. And so to have you here in this role is very comforting, because I know you are dodging the same bullets that we're all taking out here. So it gives me a lot of comfort in knowing that you're in this position 150 years later. And then fast forward to Commissioner Morales. In 1996, you were my keynote speaker at a violence prevention citywide conference that I coordinated. and you had just gotten released, and you were my public speaker, my keynote in 1996. So the fact that we have two people who I have worked with back in the day in these positions give me great comfort, because I know that your heart is in the right place and you have the experience and the know-how to do this work. So I am comforted in knowing that you're in these positions, and I am grateful to everything that you're doing. So just know that you have me, even though I'm always out here about this, that, or the other, but just know that you have me here in your corner to support whatever it is that you need, and whatever funding or whatever it is to get you the resources that you need to improve the lives of the youth that we want to serve. I'm here for all of it, to you both, okay? So now for my questions, because you know I got to come at something, right? So here it goes. So this one, I don't know who's going to answer it, but this probably whoever deals with the trauma teams, right? I'm just curious, how is the community involved in the decision making about the evaluation and trauma services? Is there is it publicly available, detailed data reports that the community can access regarding the service delivered, and any existing evaluations? In other words, I'm just really curious about the capacity of community members to reduce the long-term impact of trauma support supported at the grassroots level. So who can answer that question? I'll go to you, Chief Martinez.
Catherine or Mark, go ahead.
I can start with that if you want, Catherine, and you can go back and forth. So in terms of the community involvement in the creation and the evaluation of the trauma team network, it first goes back to really 2016. There were community listening sessions that were organized. There were 350 residents that participated in that. There were 14 of those sessions that were done. That created an RFP. The RFP was put out publicly, and different community partners were able to apply. There was a panel that was made up that was certainly very inclusive of members of the community that evaluated those RFPs, scored them, and selected what became the partners that we work with. Subsequently, the mayor increased the budget to add, that created 5 neighborhood trauma teams, plus the citywide partners. The mayor increased the budget to add a number 6 team, went through the same kind of process there. Also, about the same time, another round of community listening sessions were done. There were 5 of those that were done. As we look forward, we'll be doing another RFP process to be able to extend our reach further out into the community. Again, that'll be an RFP that will be public and be a public process. I would say that we call ourselves a network because that's what it is. It involves a number of community organizations, community health centers, along with community-based partners. All of this is on the website, neighborhoodhealing.com. So you'll want to see a list of who it is and how to contact them. That's all there. So you're talking about organizations like Tree of Life, Project Right, Madison Park Development Corporation, Whittier Street Health Center, Bowdoin Street Health Center, Mattapan Community Health Center, Louis D. Brown Peace Institute, Mothers for Justice and Equality, Boston Trauma Response, which is a program at JRI. The Boston Trauma Response Program, they're the ones that have the 24/7 support line. They're managing that. They also have the team, the trauma response team that you would see at a scene. So they're managing that process. Those members, the people on that are community residents.
No, I appreciate that. I appreciate that. And only just because I know that Councilor Wu will be letting me know about my time deficit here. I want to make sure that I get to some of the other follow-ups that I have in regards to this particular. It seems like there were a lot of nonprofit organizations and people in the space that do this work that were participating in this. And, even employees, but I'm really curious about community members. I'm talking about going back to, I always see when I walk into a room, I look to see who's in it and who's not. And oftentimes it's those who are living the realities usually don't show up into these spaces. So Catherine, if in 30 seconds, can you just tell me a little bit about some of the efforts that were made for community residents, people, not the usual suspects, just like everyday, like people who are at the barbershops. I just want to know like that, like 30 seconds.
Okay, I'll try in 30 seconds. So just to underscore what Mark said, when we designed this program, we initially started with the concept of 3 community focus groups, and it snowballed into 14 listening sessions over 6.5 weeks. We connected to 350 residents and really listened to them about the design of this entire strategy. We took that information and we built out an RFP, and before we released the RFP, we brought our results back to the residents that we emailed everybody who gave us contact information. We asked residents to review the RFP before we released it. And then just to highlight one of the points Mark made, we had community residents on the review panel. So that was for the initial structure. A year and a half later, we went back to residents and said, this is what we've done. Does it make meaning for you? And we've gotten feedback from that and tried to build that into our further of our program design. And I think to your point, I just want to hear your point, acknowledge your point. There is absolutely more we can do in terms of kind of continual feedback in the process, and also hearing from people who've received the services and did they work for you. That's the most important thing.
Thank you, and I appreciate you answering the question. I'm also curious for 2 things. One is I'd love to see that information publicly. I don't know if it exists, and if it doesn't, then it would be great to have some sort of dashboard where people can look and hear. And then 2 more recommendations that I'd like to make specifically as it relates to community engagement is that I'd like to be able to, if we're going to do this again, is to create some metrics in terms of how many people were participating that were not associated with any type of organization, but they actually went because they cared enough to want to show up, right? Like, I want us to start being more intentional about how, and it's not just about creating space for people to come into. What efforts are you all making to go into spaces where people are at? I'm thinking barbershops, I'm thinking hair salons, I'm thinking the laundromats, I'm thinking about real outreach that extends to just creating space and providing childcare and lunch, but that we're being really intentional about those voices. And then the other piece of it is that in terms of the RFP that is set out, this is really an opportunity for us to really think about how do we support minority business owners in the businesses in the city of Boston, and making sure that that RFP is looked at through the lens of racial equity, and that we are looking at who is conducting this research and the role that they play in helping us kind of like create the template for success. So I just wanted to throw all those quick little recommendations out. You know, you could take whatever you'd like and you could put the rest to the filing cabinet. It's all good. I just got to do my due diligence to say it, because otherwise then I wouldn't feel like I was heard. So I'm moving on to 2 more questions, if you guys don't mind. One is I'm curious about the jobs. I know that one of the things that we talked about is employment was really basically having a job saved my life. But I'm just curious, what are we doing for employment opportunities for young people who are undocumented in the city? What strategies are we looking at? How are we supporting young people who are undocumented in terms of job employment opportunities? And I'm not sure who can answer that.
Yeah, so I'll take that, Counselor. So as you know, and I appreciate your advocacy around this, what we were able to try to do, there's obviously a barrier for us to hire young people that are undocumented through our normal youth employment program. So one of the things we were able to do was do a partnership this year led by the Mayor's Office of Immigrant Advancement in partnership with the Department of Youth Employment and Engagement to partner with community-based organizations that we're going to primarily focus on, not primarily, exclusively focus on creating stipended work opportunities for youth who did not have documentation to be able to work currently through the process. And so what I can do, Yusufi's not on this call, neither is Rashad, are not on this hearing, but what I can do is ask them to give you a written follow-up in terms of what they were able to do and connect with. I will say what we did start to do is pre-COVID, the city of San Francisco, a few other cities have developed sort of a grant program for nonprofits that connect directly with youth who don't have documentation to work, and created some additional programming to be able to match it and expand it. We started down that route, and then COVID sort of threw that all into a mix. So this was sort of the step this summer with efforts to try to figure out a more systemic way to make sure that all young people can get access to employment. The problem is, and I'd love to figure out how to do this, but the way that our current employment is handled through the city, we're unable to use city dollars to do that. So we had to use a grant program to do it this time, and to raise private resources to do it. But I'll ask them to share with you what they did, what the outcome was, and what they're trying to figure out for next summer.
Okay, great, thank you. So I'm going to ask one last question, okay, Councilor Wu, before you shut me down. So I'm curious, how does the Office of Public Safety coordinate with BPD when it comes to violence prevention? In what ways does the Office of Public Safety inform BPD on how to prevent violence in their own ranks? And here's something that I just want us to really think about. Terrence Coleman, he was shot and killed in his home next to his mother. Okay, he experienced violence at the hands of the BPD. And there aren't enough job training programs in the world that would have stopped that from happening that day. So when we think about violence prevention, and I know that this is around youth, we also need to acknowledge there are also some adults that are committing crimes, and then also even in the BPD. So I just want to hear who can answer that, who can address it, who can provide some insight on that, in terms of how public safety informs BPD around violence within their own ranks.
Violence within their own ranks. That might be a BPD question, but in terms of my office, the Office of Public Safety, in terms of how we provide context, how we work together around coordination with BPD, for instance, it was around this unofficial Caribbean weekend. Deputy Superintendent Gaines and BPD was a part of this working group that we had to make sure that we were present in areas where people were celebrating, partying without PPE. And we all know that that Caribbean Festival weekend has been traditionally a weekend where we've experienced upticks in shootings and violence. So we wanted to make sure our deployment strategy was coordinated between BPD, SOAR Boston, and our office, and also our trauma teams, making sure everybody knew where incidents were happening, parties were happening. We had SOAR Boston who actually attended some parties, passed out PPE, making sure folks were being safe. That information, the intel, was being passed through BPD. But in terms of how we inform their relations with the community, to be honest with you, that's not my role. I'm gonna be completely honest with you. In terms of their best practices, yeah. But
No worries. Don't worry. I just threw that out there just so you all know that's on my radar. I just want us to marinate on that. And the last thing that I want to talk, and I saw that was my last thing a few minutes ago, but I would be remiss to say, and this probably is for Katherine in terms of, and Mark in regards to trauma response, is that my niece lost her boyfriend in February 15th to be exact, and he was murdered. And she has not received the appropriate trauma response. And now it's been 8 months, 6 or 7 months after. She recently had his child, and she actually ended up seeing him, not murdered, but was the first person on the scene to arrive and see him laying on the street. So I share all of this is because these are not the things that, this is not political for me, this is personal, right? This is happening in my own backyard, in my own household. And when it comes to trauma response, I feel like, there's not enough money that can go around to help support every single impact that our young people are facing. But when kids are festering and holding on to this hurt people. And as a city, we need to really start thinking about how we're utilizing our budget as a value statement and what we are funding and how we're funding it. And I think that this is probably one of the reasons why I went so hard during the budget season, because I believe the programs that are in front of me here today are the type of programs that we need more of and that need more support and more funding so that we can actually reduce the violence and the trauma that we see in our communities. So all of that just to say that I really do appreciate the work, but I know that the work needs a lot of work if we're going to move forward. So thank you all for being here and entertaining all of these questions. I got round two the next time I get you all with some more stuff. Thank you.
Right here. Councilor Roy. Oh, go ahead, Rick.
I just wanted to address what Councilor just said. Those kinds of incidents are extremely important to us. And what helps us is to get connected to the people who were exposed to that kind of trauma. That's very, very powerful. And it happens a lot. So anything, that's why we have the support line. If you have to even reach out to me directly, because we don't always know. And if we don't know, we might not be able to do anything if we do know, but if we don't know, then we can't, right? And if she was in a scene, and when we go to a scene, we're on the other side of the yellow tape, usually, even though we have a very good relationship with BPD. And BPD is very aware of our services. So if she was a victim and was interviewed, a witness and was interviewed, we do work with the homicide detective so that we can get connected. The Peace Institute is part of that network. We can get connected there, but we don't always get connected. So it's your family member, also your constituent. So think of it as, this is my constituent. How do I get them services? And then once we know that we can stay in communication with you to really try to get the services that they need.
Could I add just to add upon that? So one of the sort of silver linings of COVID-19 is this concept of contact tracing. And that's how we are trying to view the way in which we deploy trauma services. So it's not just, it's those who are indirectly and directly connected by violence, because we recognize we were missing individuals who might not live in a household, who might just simply go to the school, who may live in another address that we might not have access to. So now we're doing a better job at trying to connect the dots with those individuals who were directly and indirectly impacted by violence. We know, like you said, those people who were victimized by it sometimes become the ones who then try to victimize other people or still dealing with compounded trauma. So that's one of the silver lines. We actually have some language around what we're trying to do, and that's been our approach as a gap that we've identified.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Councilor Arroyo?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm going to try and keep this tight. And so my first question is for, I think Marty Martinez, you might be the best one to answer this, which is, we moved, when racism was declared a public health crisis, the mayor moved, I believe, $10 to $12 million into trying to address that. What and how and where is that money going into these specific folks we're talking to today? Where and how has that money been redistributed to violence prevention and dealing with the impacts of violence prevention? Or is that money still finding homes?
Yeah, so Counselor, some of that money is sprinkled out here, and I can let the individual folks that are here, but probably be more helpful for us to you through the chair is to provide you guys with that information so you can see what programs it's living with and what community resources are there, because there's other resources, language access, services around low-income housing that money also got spread into. But Katherine referenced in her slides that there are money that came into the trauma teams. There's some money that went into the SOAR Boston, and there's some money that went into the Office of Public Safety. So if you'd like, they could sort of do that now and give you a little bit of that. But the rest of the money, we could do it. We can give you concrete information through the chair.
Yeah, so more so I'm interested in just for this specific group. So in terms of this specific group here today, how has that money expanded your program? How is it being put to use?
Sure. We can start with Catherine. I think it's $1 million, so we'll start with Catherine.
Okay, so the $1 million has gone to we felt that we were underfunding a certain number of our partners, particularly our community-based partners. So to increase funding for their work, not to expand their work, but to give them more resources, more capacity for the work they were doing. That is about, I have to pull the chart up in front of me to take a look at that's a big chunk of the 1 million that's going out. I want to say in the $500,000 to $700,000 of the million. That includes an expansion of our on-scene response work. We also used some of that funding to retain BPHC positions that were vulnerable to layoffs due to the fact that they were on grants, and about $225,000 of it is going to be used for expansion. So to reference Mark Scott's point, we are going to be having conversations, looking at where the gaps are in the community for trauma resources and issuing RFPs to expand our reach. And very happy to provide you with the breakdown of that information.
Thank you. And you can do that offline if you want to just email that. And so I have one question that I think is probably best answered by Will Morales. On your first slide for BCYF, it had on it as one of the emerging ideas and concerns, work more collaboratively with BPS school police. And I'm just interested in what that looks like right now, like what you're already doing, because it's more collaborative. So what's already happening there, and then how you intend to be more collaborative, or how you would like to be more collaborative, and then finally how remote learning interacts with all of that.
Sure. I think that the idea about working more closely with school police is also another function, also looking at SOAR being a part of it, knowing that sometimes some of the challenges or some of the feuds sometimes begin within the schools. And one thing that we want to do is hopefully look at how do we better collaborate, because since we share school buildings with Boston Public Schools, if we have a dynamic relationship with the school police, we may be able to be supportive in a way of actually reducing acts of violence from moving forward out into the streets, you know what I mean? And hopefully addressing them while they're inside the school. So it's looking at sort of a new collaborative process too as well. At the same time, in the time that I've been here and prior to Talia, one of the things that I did was work with the street workers and walk with them. And a lot of them have been doing this work for a very long time. Similar to the way that you have ONS workers who actually get kind of fatigued after attending their 2000 meeting and they've been beat up and they tend to move on. We're looking for opportunities and where sometimes there could be a sort of career pipeline ladder for some of our SOAR or street workers to move into. And think about the perfect fit would be if some of them can qualify to be school police, right? Who have these mediation skills, who understand to work with young people and kind of make that connecting and that dot happen, but they're more rooted now in the school to kind of do that. So there's that, and that's sort of an expanding an idea in regards to how we may be able to do that kind of work moving forward. What was the other question you said? You mentioned
remote learning, right? So you're going to have a lot of kids that aren't in school. I think 50%, I don't know what the number is now, but 50% had gone all remote. And so no matter how this goes, even if we have a hybrid that eventually works, we're still looking at 50% of our student population isn't even going into a school building. And so I don't know how that's gonna, I don't know how COVID in terms of how it's impacting what our school layouts look like, how that's gonna impact school policing. And by, proxy, how that's going to impact your ability to collaborate with them, right? And so there might be things that they're already doing that might be like the things that are already working in terms of your collaboration that might be changing due to the way that school's changing. And so I wanted to see if there was anything we could identify there that maybe we can get ahead of instead of finding out after we're seeing it show up in front of us.
Well, in regards to remote learning, I mean, we've been working really closely with the Boston Public Schools as they're going to roll out their plans, and understanding that parents are also going to have that need for something for their young people. There's nothing yet really strongly solidified because they're also looking for other partner organizations, and After School and Beyond is also doing some work. But we see ourselves supporting some remote learning to happen in the spaces that we tend to share with the schools. but it's going to be very unique because it's going to be a new realm for us as we do this kind of work in partnership with the Boston Public Schools. But our staff is, able and willing, but it's going to be a very unique way of us doing work as we move forward. We know that parents are already asking for that kind of support. We just want to make sure that if we're going to provide the support and we're going to provide the programming, that there are going to be some strong safe measures there to ensure that we're going to have a safe environment to do it.
Okay, that's perfect for an answer. Thank you. And then finally, my last question is really more of a statement. I benefited from the services of the trauma team. I had a murder very close to me, and I think that they're a very underrated asset to the city. And so my hope is that, and this is just open to everybody on this who's listening, if there's a way for me in my office to push the work you do or to help the work you do or to find funding and enforce things that you guys are trying to get done and ways to work better, I think our trauma in this city is about to go through the roof. We got PTSD coming from what we just experienced through COVID. We had 730 some deaths. That climbs every day. And so there's a lot of impacts that our children are having, that our folks out there are having in terms of losing jobs, being under a much tighter vise. And our trauma team, I know they've specialized a lot in showing up to the scenes of crime, showing up to console families, but they're going to be needed in ways I don't think we've utilized them. And so my hope is that we can find a way to both increase their funding, increase their impact, and increase their reach. And so, if there's ways to do that or ways we're already trying to do that, please inform me of ways we can help on that. And that's it for me. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Councilor Arroyo. Councilor Asabi George.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, everyone, for being here. I've been in and out of this meeting, so I haven't followed it closely enough to ask a question that either hasn't been asked before or might not be appropriate for this setting. So I will, I'll certainly review the meeting once it's posted on video and follow up individually with any of you on some of those questions. But I will say, I'm sure my colleagues have already thanked you for your work and your efforts on behalf of the city. I know that the work that you're all doing is some of the most difficult work that has to be done on behalf of our residents, especially our most vulnerable residents. So just want to say thank you, and please know that I will watch the video once it's posted and follow up as I've had a number of conversations with a number of you along the way as it is. Thanks, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. And Councillor Flaherty. Oh, is Councillor Flaherty still here? I think he's been kind of, maybe his internet issues was coming on and off. Let me see, I don't see him on anymore. Okay, so I had hopefully just a few questions. So in terms of this last summer, or this kind of wrapping up summer, how many total youth summer jobs were provided at the end? I know there was kind of a phasing in of we're going to do this much and then try to ramp it up over the course with additional signups. So how many by the end positions were there for young people through Success Link?
Yes, I'll take that, Councillor. YE, which runs that, obviously, Rashad Cope and their team, they ended up hiring, I'm trying to pull the number for you as I have it right now, they ended up hiring about 3,500 youth through Success Link. Throughout all employment, it was close to 5,800. Because as you know, there's ABCD, the PIC, MLK Scholars, YLU. Those are the rough numbers to give you a sense that 3,500 number of YE was more this summer than last summer. So they were able to hire more even in the midst of COVID. But again, always trying to increase that. So that was the number they hired.
Okay, and so does that include, and that does not include the, is that everyone, or is that just the 14 to 18-year-olds versus the supervisor positions for 19 to 24?
That is a great question. I would have to check with them directly. I think it's separate.
Okay, yeah, maybe easiest if I can add something to your list, Chief, in terms of follow-up of kind of just the breakdown of by age group and number, and then number of weeks too, because I know some of the programs you mentioned are shorter versus longer. So
yeah, and we added about 2 weeks to the overall program, but yeah, we can break that down so you can have it.
Okay, great. And then so in terms of the funding for that this year, how much of that came from CARES Act or kind of temporary emergency funding that will then disappear by the time we get to future years of summer jobs.
Yeah, so along with that breakdown, unfortunately, since Rashad's not part of this hearing, he would know that information, but I can break it down for you. I think a small portion of it was CARES Act money, to be honest. I mean, we redirected some funds, but we'll double back. As a reminder, we always allocate funding in the summer, and then we try to take what most of that remaining funding is and to put it into year-round employment. So again, we've increased the number of year-round employment we're trying to get this year. But in terms of the breakdown, Counselor, I'll make sure that's included on the financial side.
Okay, great. And then my last question, just if we could do a quick kind of quick answer from each of the panelists, just around if there was sort of one thing that is maybe outside of the control of your immediate, department or position as it relates to violence prevention and intervention that could happen for the city. Like, it could be funding related, it could be housing related, it could be anything. What is kind of that one thing that you think would make a big difference for the work that you're trying to do?
Talia, you want to go first?
Yeah, I think I'm a believer in social organization, and I think that part of what we see in our neighborhoods is a lot of social disorganization, and the only way, which is a contributing factor to a lot of the social ills that we see in our community, and the way to rectify that is to empower residents. I think that our work is going to make a difference, but if we can't get residents to buy into what they want for their community and fight for that, then we're going to continue to see these cycles of violence, the cycles of poverty, like all of these social ills that are in our community. So we need to figure out ways to empower our residents to create vision for their communities, for what they want.
Thank you. Feel free to jump in, or I can call on people if it's easier, but jump in.
I agree with Talia wholeheartedly, but and another step upon that, I think we need to do a better job as a city as sort of highlighting our local products of our systems and elevating those products to positions of leadership. So how do we highlight those kids who actually went through our public school system and creating spaces and platforms for them to be leaders, because they have to see end products that look like themselves in order to visualize and say it's possible for them. So again, that's not a city program per se, but that's sort of an initiative saying as a collective, how do we support the products of our system?
Thank you.
I would say, I very much agree with what Talia was saying. I'd also pick up on the fact that, the city does have a lot of organization to it. We haven't talked about the neighborhood associations. That's a very important component. I know there's a panel coming on after us that is community organizations. I don't see them as really being separate. At the commission, we don't do it. We don't do the work. The work is done through our partners. I think we've got the right structure. It just needs to be stronger and it needs to reach further, right? So there are community organizations that have been doing this kind of work for a long time that are not contracted partners with us. That's because the funding goes but so far. There are community health centers in extremely important neighborhoods that are impacted by violence that are not contracted partners with us. The trauma response team, those people that show up at the scene, are community residents that we train, that we compensate. We were compensating them way too low. The pandemic really showed that to us, so we've increased the compensation that goes to them. There are other people out there that are like that. We have there are a lot of youth peer-led organizations that are at the commission, that are in other parts of the city that have done fantastic work with young people. We could have a youth-focused trauma response team. We don't have that right now, but we've got the infrastructure in the city to do it. Catherine alluded to the capacity building and training initiative. They've got the right set of training around being trauma informed, resilience informed, wholeness informed, health informed, all with a racial justice lens. They've got the right people, but we were looking at laying one of those people off. But for the investment that the mayor made recently and the city council approved, we would have had a layoff for one of those people. We were robbing Peter to pay Paul to keep him as long as we did. And that team is too small. That team should have more people on it. They should be doing more trainings in more agencies. They should do it for the city council. They should do it for your staff. They should do it for the neighborhood associations, right? So last thing I'll say, we haven't talked much about the Violence Intervention Prevention Program, or VIP, or Village in Progress. They've been around for 10 years, level funded the whole time. So the question about, what are we doing wrong and what we do better to leave the prevention program level funded for 10 years, there it is. So we've got good people, we got good structure. It's just not as strong as it needs to be, doesn't reach as far as it needs to reach.
Thank you, Reverend.
I guess I'll go real quick. I think just to piggyback a little bit about Talia, Rufus, and everyone has already mentioned, one of the things that we do see in our spaces is that we do see a lot of community groups use our spaces and organize their meetings. But one thing that I would love to see is more capacity building of them. I think that we continue to evolve, but they don't. They sometimes don't know how they can restructure themselves, how do they evolve themselves, how do they become stronger advocates. Sometimes those things are not there. They lose sometimes the most passionate individuals who don't possess those skills as they either age out of that role or they move on, or unfortunately some people pass away. And I would love to see more of that capacity building happen with those neighborhood task force, community councils or committees, because I think that when you end up building their capacity, then the social organization stuff is gonna happen. They would know how to coordinate themselves a whole lot better. And I'm pretty sure you guys have seen it if you walked into meetings and wondering, where does it begin? Where does it end? You know what I mean? And did I leave feeling that we did something, or did we leave just talking about something with no action plan? And I think that that's what I look to see more happen in our spaces, so that not only just hubs where people can gather, but where people can actually get some skills and build their communities better.
This is Roy Martin. I think in terms of what would be the greatest benefit to us in our efforts to program in the community would be, number one, a sustained effort to mitigate COVID-19. Because in order to serve humans, you need agencies with their doors open, safely open, in order to properly, connect and partner with our communities and individuals to serve. So that's number one. Number two, I think there's some things that we're doing internally that we just need to kind of, continue to circle the wagons and close the loop. I know I have a meeting on Friday with Marta out of the chief's office, and I know we've had a series of meetings with Chief Martinez as well, trying to continue to support, our SSY program. And then, I know some of the comments were areas where we could expand and enhance. So I'm encouraged about that. There's not much of an ask that I have, just forward progress with what we're already plotting. So, and thank you for this.
Thank you. Go ahead, Catherine.
Okay, I just wanted to see if anyone, the only thing I would say is to echo what other folks have said in terms of what does it mean to bring some of these strategies to scale, and where are the gaps, and what we need to get to those gaps. And then I would just also offer, what does it mean to reimagine our approach in terms of really, and maybe, COVID will help us think differently about prevention, and so that we have to do the response, we have to be responsive, we have to support communities to heal. But really, what does it mean to actually prevent this? And that's all of the big buckets that I know you talk about all the time. It's housing, it's schools, it's community development, it's good careers, not jobs, and all of those pathways, and how can we, organize ourselves to kind of change the framework.
Thank you. Okay, anyone else want to chime in on that? Or... Great, thank you. I'm going to offer colleagues a chance for second round. Councilor Campbell.
No, I mean, I will, first of all, I'm eating something because I thought I was going to pass out, but I just want to say thank you. I mean, I know this is not easy work, and everyone has good intentions, is passionate about this. I mean, Councilor Wu and all my colleagues had great questions, so I'm not going to belabor the point. One thing that did come up and was one of my questions was really about how do you get community and residents on the ground involved in an intimate way. And I think some folks brought up neighborhood associations. Obviously, Reverend Scott, you live in my district, but I think that is a piece that is often missing, is the people on the ground in their neighborhoods who have solutions and ideas as to how to stop the violence in their neighborhood, who have solutions with respect to addressing root causes of violence, because they're living the problem every single day. But they're never at the table, they're never invited to participate, or they're not taken seriously. And I think that's a critical piece of the problem. And so that in my office, that is the foundation of our very work. So I appreciate all of you. I do want to get to the panel number 2, frankly, because it's so late. So looking forward to listening to them, because I think they also offer perspectives where we can do better and do it in a way that's constructive. So thank you all, stay safe and healthy, and really appreciate you guys taking the time to be a part of this. And I also appreciate those folks who participated for More Than Words at the beginning with respect to public testimony. Really, really shout out to those young people, because some of them have gone through these programs, have lived different lives, and they are the examples, frankly, of who we need at the table on a more consistent basis in terms of solutions. So thank you to More Than Words for showing up at the beginning of this hearing.
Thank you, Councilor. Councilor Mejia?
Yes. I want to go over to your house, Campbell, because I only got Doritos up in here.
I have chips. I'm going to pass out. So hopefully everyone can get something, because I'm going to stay here all day if I have to.
Yeah, I'm not gonna occupy any additional space other to say thank you to everyone who's out here doing this work. I know it is not easy, but I do appreciate every effort that is made. And I do appreciate some of my colleagues asking what else can we be doing and how else can we be supporting, because it's really easy for us to ask these questions when we're sitting on this side of things, when in reality, you all are the ones who are doing the work on the front lines. You see it every day, day in and out. But oftentimes what I have seen is that there is a disconnect from those who are in positions of power and those who are on the ground level doing the work. And if we're not taking our directive from those who are in the front lines and leading and also living the realities, then we're missing the opportunity to really reimagine the type of programming that we need in this day and age. So I just want you all to know that I acknowledge that it is not easy doing the work. Having been someone in the front lines doing the work, I do appreciate it. And the last thing that I'll say for this particular panel is that, and I don't know if this is true or not, but during the budget season, I opposed the mayor's budget, and it was really not the mayor's budget, it's the people's budget, because I felt like most of the dollars needed to be poured into these type of programs. And I feel like in many ways, there's a lot of political ramifications that happen when you take a stand for what you believe in. And just because I spoke up against that particular budget wasn't speaking up against the administration or the work. I think that we need to be serious about how we're investing resources to ensure that your programs are fully funded so that we can do the business of the work that we were hired to do as elected officials. And so this is specifically for you, Chief Martinez. I'm going in record and saying that regardless of what happened during that time, I'm here to do the work. And I want to do the work alongside you. And I don't want to be seen as the problem. I want you to embrace me as a colleague and as someone who wants to be at the table to inform the decision and to work alongside you and your team to move my people forward. So that is going to require us doing some restorative justice, you and I, to figuring out what we need to do. But this group here and the work that comes out of the Boston Public Health Commission are all the types of programs that I deeply care about, and I want a seat at that table to work in collaboration with you and your team. That's it.
You, Councilor Chief, you were called out. Did you want to say anything? Okay, good. Councilor Sabi George?
No, nothing else for me today. I'm looking forward to the next panel. Thank you.
Great. Okay. Go ahead.
Councilor Wu?
Yes.
My name's Frank DeLuca, and I work in the Boston Police Office of Research and Development. And I thought we should mention just one more thing, that the Boston Police provides leadership and administrative oversight to two very important youth violence prevention grants. That's the SSYI and the Shannon grant. And these are two fine examples of the police department engaging in positive engagement with the community. And I just wanted to make sure you were all aware of that.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, so we're going to do a quick switch now to the next panel. We're going to. Okay. While we are doing that, I can take, we had one other person who had signed up for public testimony in the meantime. So as we're doing the switch, we can give George Lee 2 minutes for public testimony. George?
Hi, good afternoon. Hi, my name is George Lee. I'm an organizer with Youth Justice and Power Union. And thank you very much to the lead sponsors on this hearing order, Councilor Mejia, Councilor Campbell, and Councilor Wu for chairing this. And also just a lot of thanks for folks really cutting to the heart of the issue about needing more resources for violence prevention. And I have to say this is this hearing brings up a lot of emotions, just a lot of the heartbreak that's involved with really trying to be there, folks who are there for young people, and the losses that people have seen over the years when young people are killed or get locked up. And yeah, just, all the different ways folks have talked about, like Councilor Mejia, you're talking about needing more resources for the work that Talia is doing, Roy, Will, looking at the budget as a value statement, Councilor Arroyo talking about needing increased funding for outreach workers, and other folks talking about the problems with just having level funding. And I think it's just important because although in this hearing we're talking about all this positive prevention work, that too often people look at violence and think of the police and think of and treat people as inherently violent. If you go to bpdnews.com, they love to put out a post of all the guns they take off the streets. And there's this characterization of the community and of the individuals who, like Talia mentioned, don't want to be doing what they're doing. But people get portrayed as inherently violent as opposed to addressing the root of the problem, which is people lack opportunities, they lack support, and they lack resources. So we need to really figure out what resources need to be added for jobs, for housing, for youth programming, for youth workers, so that these programs don't have to struggle to support the young people that we care so much about. So I forget if Talia's presentation was mentioning like piloting that stipend workplace readiness life skills course, and trying to broker things with AutoZone. When a young person calls you on the phone or they're at a street memorial and they're looking for an opportunity, it's devastating when there's just actually not enough jobs or resources to give folks. And I know that folks are coordinating as much as you can with the limited resources you can to connect people, but it takes a lot of time to talk with all the AutoZones and talk with all the possible employers, as opposed to just having the money for a guaranteed jobs program, so that when someone's hurting, you don't have to go through hoops and hoops and hoops to get there. And so you're not stuck referring folks for months on end. And so really looking at how do we do that really focused work for those folks that really need it, but also preventing violence, not just in the focused way, but thinking about it in a comprehensive way. So it's not just a few hundred or 1,000 young people, but as folks mentioned right now with Chief Martinez, I think you mentioned with the pandemic and folks being out of work and struggling with financial survival and isolation, that folks who are slipping deeper into struggling. And to stop that, you need to have a wide system of resources in place. So you need thousands of jobs, you need affordable housing across the board. Because right now what's happening instead, when you look at that map of where the shootings are, again, it's not because people are inherently violent. It's because that's where poverty is. That's where racism is. That's where lack of opportunity is. And folks are being criminalized in ways that are perpetuating that systemic racism that Katherine was referring to. So I just want to pitch, as folks know, folks who are working very hard to advocate for defunding the police and shifting resources to programs like this. And that's the heart of the issue here. Two quick things. One is on the Shannon grants, which was just...
If you could summarize, because we're running a little late, but yeah, finish with your two.
Thanks. Yeah, the last 2 points, just the Shannon grants. As folks know, there's a lot of community groups have a real issue with how the Shannon grants are run. It's administered by the police department. No community organization should have to apply to the same folks who are doing that state-sanctioned violence that Katherine was talking about, who are perpetuating mass incarceration. There needs to be programs administered through the Health Commission and other departments, unconnected to the police department and not connected to grants programs that are also funding police to over-police neighborhoods. In the state, we had a fight years back to try to increase Department of Public Health grants instead of public safety grants so that we could have alternatives to Shannon. And then the last point is just on youth jobs, that the administration had actually committed. They said that they had enough funding for 4,800 Success Link jobs this summer. So to hear that there are only 3,500 means that there is a big gap in what should have happened and what needs to happen instead. So as a result, we need to look at how to use the money that wasn't spent and really ramp up the year-round jobs program. It seems like there should be enough money for 1,500 or 2,000 year-round jobs, and really buckling down on supporting the 14 and 19 to 24-year-olds who, again, are some of those folks who are going to slip into violence if we don't support them. And as well as the grants programs that Chief Martinez, it's good to hear that you said that there actually was a partnership with groups to provide jobs to undocumented young people, because we were told, unfortunately, to our faces no repeatedly that wasn't going to happen. So if it did happen, that's actually good. But it'd be great to just know that in advance and have that communication instead of being told that it's not going to happen, so that we can celebrate y'all instead of, frankly, criticizing folks for not making that happen, but really hoping that can also ramp up this year. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay.
And Councilor Wu, sorry, just quickly, I just wanted to let you know, George's questions that he sent to us looped you in, because we looped in Rashad Cope as well to get responses to those very questions. So thank you. And just wanted to flag that.
Thank you. Okay, so just a note for our sponsors, I don't see a few of the names that I had been given for the panel in the waiting room, and it might have been a time issue, but just want to flag that I don't see Monica or Tina in there. The folks that are in the waiting room seem to be staff members from the Health Commission and BPD. So
I know Monica couldn't make it. I'll check in with Tina. It might have been a delay on her end, but we do have the other two, so we'll start with them.
Great. Okay, so we want to welcome Rayquan, Jaquel, and Ari. In any order, if you could feel free to introduce yourself and give your statement, and then we can go into question and answers with counselors.
I guess I can go first. Okay. Thank you, Councilor Wu, Councilor Campbell, and Councilor Mejia for giving me the opportunity to speak at today's hearing. My name is Rayquan Farrington, and I'm a life coach at Roxbury Youth Works gift program. Roxbury Youth Works is a 39-year-old community-based minority nonprofit serving Boston's youth involved in the juvenile justice system and/or the child welfare system. We have been lucky for the past 2 years to have the Youth Development Fund support our GIFT program. GIFT, which stands for Gaining Independence for Tomorrow, matches young women that are either at high risk or actively being sexually exploited with a life coach from our team. Each life coach works one-on-one with each young woman to work on self-advocacy, life skill building, and other self-identified goals to intervene and prevent risk of sexual exploitation. GIFT also supports alumni of the program as they continue on their journey in recovery of being exploited. We have utilized the youth development funding to allow us to provide our girls with experiences that they wouldn't otherwise have access to in their day-to-day life. So many of our girls have missed out on their childhood due to trauma, and this funding allows us to provide them with memorable, positive experiences to hold on to. Being able to have these events allows our girls to build a community and not feel alone in their journey. One key element that lacks in a lot of our girls' lives is consistency and stability. A lot of the times, our girls are displaced from their homes, placed in hospitals, and or shelters. It's quite a challenge and anxiety-provoking when you are uncertain about what your next move is going to be and cannot anticipate what tomorrow will look like. A majority of our youth live for today and worry about tomorrow when it arrives, and for that reason, we make it a point to make meeting with them as consistent as possible while making a tradition out of our group gatherings, specifically our holiday events. Normally, the holidays are an exciting time because we get to spend them with family, eat, relax, and enjoy a few days off. But for our girls, the holidays are not as exciting. Instead, it's one of the hardest times. We have a good number of girls in programs for foster homes, so they tend to think about and miss their families a lot, especially since they cannot see them. For the past 2 years, we've been able to step in and provide our youth with an environment and safe space that exudes that sense of family that is lacking. We bring in home-cooked meals, serving different cuisines from various cultures, giving our youth the ability to take a minute to remember their native country or fond holiday memories from before. We also have music, games, and all-around good company to further the familial ambiance. Furthermore, we have also been able to partake in an array of events such as go to a Celtics game, Disney on Ice, lake compounds, seeing a Bronx Tale in Boston's Theater District, snow tubing, and even a 2-day camping trip that allowed our girls to create a bond with one another and memories to last a lifetime. We have also been able to host events such as a luncheon in Boston and a New York trip, which included experiencing a Broadway play and a dinner for our alumni to encourage continued engagement and solidify our message of once a gift girl, always a gift girl. Particularly during COVID-19, this funding has allowed us to engage our girls in activities virtually to continue their ability to feel that sense of community. During COVID-19, while the girls were isolated in their homes or programs, we wanted to ensure that the girls had a sense of normalcy and feelings of unity in these uncertain, scary times. We were able to host health and wellness groups, nail and hair care groups, paint night, and an end of school year virtual party with food and a DJ. Each one of these opportunities for our girls to participate in encourages our girls to bond positive communities and relationships with one another and our staff. We are all grateful for this funding to give our girls new experiences that allow them to enjoy their childhood, gain new knowledge, and explore endless possibilities. Thank you again for your time and providing our girls with once-in-a-lifetime opportunities. Thank you.
Thank you. Who wants to go next? Ariana or Jaquel?
I can go ahead and go next. So I just want to start off by saying, hi, my name is Jaquel. Thank you for having us here today. I was not aware of the need to prepare a statement, so I'll just give some context for our organization and some of the work that we've been doing on the more recent end as well. So again, my name is Jaquel. I serve as the Boston Program Director for Teen Empowerment. We also have sites in both Somerville, Massachusetts, and Rochester, New York. Our work focuses on empowering young people in their own neighborhoods to be influencers and change agents in their own communities. Our work is really intentionally localized because we recognize that the need for close, tight-knit community and recognize that that is where young people are able to make their largest level of impact through their friends, through their family, and the community around them. We work on a variety of issues, and we work with young people from the age of 14 to 21 on these issues. The issues that we've been working on more recently have been education, violence intervention and prevention, and mental health, while also doing some work around civic engagement. We recognize through our work that it is not singular. So those issues that we talk about in education also overlap with issues we see in the violence intervention and prevention space, which also interact with all the other issues that we work on with young people. And we recognize that the best way to get work done is not by, only listening to young people or only listening to adults, but recognizing that we all have a role to play in making our communities stronger and making sure that the needs of our community are being addressed from all of those angles. So when teen empowerment started, it started really around, Julia spoke a little bit to the 90s. And I mean, I don't have much context for that. I was just a baby, but really started in that space of looking at, how do we make sure that young people who are in the community who are being seen as these, hyper violent young people are able to be seen as human beings and able to be seen as seen for the leaders that they represent in communities, so that we don't look at them and section them off from everyone else, but we utilize the leadership that they hold to make change and positive changes for their community. And so we still hold that as a really integral value, is that young people hold a lot of power, and the ways in which we shift communities is in making sure that we provide space and platforms for that power to then influence advocacy efforts, community change efforts, et cetera. And yeah, so I'm excited to be here today and really looking forward to seeing what kind of questions we have coming up, and really, really excited to have Ari with me here today, who is working with us as well. So I will go ahead and let Ari go next.
Hello, so my name is Ariana Constant Patton. I'm an associate program coordinator with TE. I'm not gonna reiterate everything that Jaquel just said. Just doesn't make sense to do so. So I can speak briefly about my own experience with the organization. I started when I was 14. My 18th birthday is at the end of the month. So I don't think without this organization, I don't think I would be, making it to 18. And that's just due to the fact that for the past 3 years prior to this, I have been working with TE as a youth organizer. And it's been quite the experience. I've, built a close connection with all of the adult staff that we have. We have program coordinators. Jaquel started as a program coordinator, and she's one of the main people that I have looked up to for all these years, and been able to reach this adult staff position before even hitting, the legal age of an adult. And so with that being said, being able to work with young people, mainly in the violence prevention group, because this summer we had 3 groups. We had our mental health group, our violence intervention and prevention group, and also our education group. Working on these three different topics, I mainly was working with the violence prevention group in order to survey and talk to different young people, as well as talk with the mayor and Rufus, and just being able to see different insights, and also give our perspective as working with these young people all summer. And with that being said, with what we have received, we have been able to do this work for the funding that we've received. And on top of that, been able to make an impact on young people that have worked with us this summer. A lot of them are hoping to come back for the school year, however that may look, because it's the first time we were fully virtual. As you guys might all notice, we're all on Zoom right now. So with that being said, I just appreciate this opportunity to be here and, be a part of this today, and hope to see a lot coming out of this. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you to all of our panelists. We'll go to counselors now for questions, starting with Counselor Campbell.
Thank you, Counselor Wu. And just an update, Tina had to jump off for an emergency, but she will probably jump back on. So just flagging that. She may be in a waiting room somewhere that I can't see. Thank you, ladies, first of all, for waiting so long to offer some remarks and testimony. Really appreciate that. Frankly, I'm always unnerved a little bit when we go so long, you have to wait. I know how busy you guys are, so really want to thank you for taking the time. And so my question really is, we're hearing from the administration the various pieces of their strategy around how they coordinate with each other, their specific initiatives, funding, the need for more funding, et cetera, et cetera. But from your perspective, right, you're on the ground every single day working with different populations of folks. I'm always interested in hearing from you guys as providers what we can be doing better as a city, particularly when it comes to engagement, so engaging you and your organizations and participants on the funding side. And lastly, we often talk about measuring people's success. I know that can be really hard if you are understaffed at your organization to be gathering metrics or to be doing reporting, right, for various grants. So when I pushed, for example, for the Youth Development Fund, which was one of my first budget initiatives, it was really working with the administration to make sure there was not a lot of red tape and reporting requirements, because that was one of the things we heard from youth development organizations. So I would love to hear your perspectives on that. Is how do you measure success, or what we should be really doing there to hold organizations accountable, but where we need to be also careful. And if you hear anyone, that's my husband and my baby in the background as well.
Go ahead, just jump in.
Okay, yes, I'll go ahead and jump in. I have a lot of thoughts. If people who have worked with me in the past know I like to talk, so I'm going to try to keep things brief and really get to the piece of your question. I think a lot of, when I think about what people can be doing better, especially from the context of working at teen empowerment, I think a lot of what I see is that I think there are a lot of people who want to do really great work, who want to engage community, who want to make things better for young people and for the community at large. I think a lot of times what happens, however, is that the conversation tends to be with the intermediaries and not the young people who are experiencing what's going on. And so one of the things that it's been most powerful when we talk about like tracking success is that I think data is extremely important. People know I love numbers. I'm a former math teacher. I'm like all about the numbers. And I think that numbers can tell the story depending on what story you're trying to tell and depending on what question you're asking. And I think a lot of times we need to get back to young people about what questions should we actually be asking? Like what is actually making your life better or not, or challenging you in your life, so that when we're tracking data that actually will impact these young people in the communities that they're in. Because if we are doing better for young people, we're doing better for community. Especially when we're talking about the young people who we're working with, in Roxbury and Dorchester, who are not only young people, right, but are also like Black and brown young people, who are also impoverished young people, who are also young people who are dealing with mental health concerns and like lower educational outcomes. And so these are young people who are most marginalized. And then we're saying like, we're going to do these things for you. We're not listening to what you actually are saying that you need. And so I think that that's a huge piece of it is like, what's hard for me sometimes is so for example, these kind of conversations and like, I can see the intention and interest from counselors or from the other organizations that are on, and young people don't see that, they're not in these conversations. They're not on these calls. And in a lot of ways, we walk into a lot of conversations where we'll bring young folks from teen empowerment into the room and where they're the only young people in the room, and I think that is a real, it does a disservice to the work that we're trying to do. And so I think that that piece of it, I think is really huge. Is actually listening to young people as partners and not just people who are receiving service, right? That they actually can speak to how we move forward, And so I think that is a huge, huge, huge piece that I think about a lot. And I think that also, and this was spoken to a little bit earlier, but I think that we really have to think about how do we wrap around families, because we can do a lot of these work with these individuals.
Jaquel,
people, these individual people, period. However, if they're walking back into a situation, so as we're thinking about positive intervention work, I think a lot of what we need to do.
I'm sorry, Jaquel, Madam Chair, I really wanted to hear what she had to say about wrapping around families. I don't mean to interrupt, but Jaquel, we lost you for a minute. Could you go back to where you started to talk about wrapping around families?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I just saw the little notification pop up that it was unstable. So I'm just saying that wrapping around families, because the impact that we're having on young people can be diminished if they're walking back into a situation that it really isn't continuing to set them up for success. And so as we look at programs that are working with, being able to connect the programs, because there are programs working with families, there are programs working with young people, but rarely are those programs working together to think about how are we wrapping around this whole family, this whole community, this whole village of people. And so I think a lot around how do we make sure that not just I think sometimes on a higher level, the connections exist as far as the people who are managing it from a higher level know that those things exist. But a lot of times on the ground, it's a lot harder to see those connections and to see that shared strategy. So I think that if there are ways for the city to hold more of the understanding of how we connect these organizations. I know there's the city safe meetings and the weekly meetings that Rufus spoke about earlier, but being more intentional around that, how do we do more of that? How do we bring more people to the table in those sorts of meetings so that we can actually strategize together?
That's very helpful. And others can jump in too. That was very helpful. Thank you.
So I can jump in. So I think with that being said, and I'm going to use this meeting today, I guess, as a perfect example, is young people, they're still young. I'm not going to sit here and lie to you and act like I know everything that was happening in this meeting today, and say that I could connect all the dots, because I definitely couldn't. I think that a lot of these, meetings where, it's open to the public, it's open to people to come in, to listen, to sit down. It's not necessarily open to those who have not been in these spaces before. And I think in saying that, I'm saying, like, I don't need you to dumb it down for me. I just need you to explain it in a way that I have seen before, or that I can understand better. And I think that happens very, very, very often when walking into these spaces, just because, you don't always expect a young person to walk in and be like, no, I'm here to listen. I'm here to understand. And it's just very common for that to be the case. And so with that being said, it's just like these meetings, I think they should be more open to, young people and having their voice into it, whether that's in, making statements or just being able to listen to it. Like, what do these things mean? Is there a chat box I can type in so I can ask questions? Is there a way that I can ask questions? Because not everyone gets this opportunity that I'm receiving as still being a young person right now. And that's just the reality of it. And they also don't always know how they can get to this point as well. So I think with these meetings, these important things that are happening, whether it's an organization that they're currently working with, or they're just trying to find, the logistical side of like trying to start something. If they looking forward to, hey, in the future, I might want to start my own nonprofit. How does that look? How does the background of things like that look? If these meetings aren't adapted to also have young people come in, ask questions, it doesn't need to be a young people like space. I think that's also a misconception where it's just like, oh yeah, like we should have this exclusive to young people. We don't need that. That's not what we're asking for. We're just asking for, it to be like understood that we should also be welcome into these meetings, because a lot of the time it also does not feel like we are welcomed in these meetings, because it seems so businessy and like technical, where it's just like, what am I walking into? And
I'm sorry, I'm laughing because I'm like, understood.
Yeah, like
I'm taking notes seriously, because it's like, how do we design these spaces? I'm seeing Frank here, who's just visible and listening, and thank you. But how do we design these spaces to make it a dialogue and conversation? Hello.
Sorry, that's our office manager.
Okay, I was like, who is that, Ariana? But how do we design these spaces, right, so that everyone feels not only can participate, add value, can chime in, and it's hard to do. And I think that's one of the frustrations we have on my team too, is we often are in spaces where it's 200 young people or 100 young people or 50 young people, but all young people. It's not necessarily bringing these spaces together. So this is very helpful, and I think there's ways in which we can do better. And that's why I really acknowledged the young people at the beginning who testified and were vulnerable to share their stories and how these programs work for them, because it's critically important to what we do. And selfishly, I'll say it's good to know that some of the things we're advocating for, that is actually having a positive impact, particularly in this time when it's really hard. Julia, I see you twice, so this is so strange. You just popped up twice on the screen. So I'll turn it back over to my colleagues. I want to be mindful of people's time, and Rayquan, if you want to add anything, feel free. But I just wanted to really acknowledge that piece around designing these spaces to really allow for greater participation, and not separate and apart, but a part of the same conversation, which is critically important. So thank you, guys or ladies.
Thank you, Councilor Campbell. Councilor Mejia?
Yes, I'm having a lot of technical difficulties, so it looks like I'm just multiplying here right in front of your very eyes, which I am.
It's so strange.
There can never be enough of me, So, yes, I first wanted to thank Team Empowerment, and I am dating my age here because I think I was around before even Team Empowerment was even an idea. I think I was around in the initial time when it first came to be, and I went to the first peace conference that Teen Empowerment hosted. a long time ago, y'all. So, and it's so disheartening that I am still doing this work, giving the amount of it's both sad that 20 something years later, we're still having the same conversation.
Okay, hold on. But I think you switched to your other screen, Councilor Mejia. I'm gonna try to unmute that one.
Unmute. Okay, so I was just talking about how old I was and just how grateful I am to teen empowerment and all the work that they have done and continue to do to help serve our community. And you know what I love about teen empowerment is that they do youth and adult dialogues. And to speak to that point in terms of that, it's not just a whole bunch of young people, but that they really create space for adults to work in collaboration and to inform the thinking. And that's really intentional. And also what I find to be, that I appreciate is the work that they do with bringing police officers and young people together to kind of have those restorative justice circles and to talk about these conversations. So yes, lots of amazing work coming from teen empowerment and a lot of other youth organizations. So I just want to give you all a big shout out for your steadfast commitment and innovation and all the work that you all do. I do have just a quick question. I know, Frank, we haven't heard much from you. So Frank DeLuca, this is your chance to shine up in here. Tell me a little bit about your role and how you intersect with the community organizations. Because you said, I think earlier, and I don't know everybody, so I'm learning everybody. I think you said you're part of the BPD, but can you just tell me how you work in collaboration with the teen empowerment? How do you work in collaboration with other nonprofit organizations to help support the violence prevention efforts? Can you tell me a little bit about that? And if I've met you before, I'm sorry, I don't remember. Just bring me up to speed.
Well, I'm the, thank you. And I'm the grant manager for the SSYI, that's Safe and Successful Youth Initiative. And as I said before, it's a youth violence prevention program funded by the Executive Office of Health and Human Services in the state. I deal directly with the Boston Public Health Commission, which is the lead agency in the grant, in the program. And so they will run and offer an RFP for organizations to sign up or apply to be involved in the program. We have organizations now contracted, like More Than Words, Mission Safe, YOU Boston, Project Right. So my connection with the organizations is limited to that.
Mm-hmm. So then I guess my question then would be, is like an Ariana or other young people like Carrie Mays and Nate Sager, a lot of young people in the city of Boston who are doing some really incredible work that are associated with these organizations. Do you have young people in your decision-making RFP process that are informing who and what types of programs you should be funding? Do young people have a voice in any of your decision-making processes?
Well, certainly it is broadcast by the Public Health Commission when they do have an RFP. I'm sure they would invite anyone that would have an interest in dealing with these proven risk individuals, 17 to 24-year-old, that are most likely to be involved in violent activity in the city. That's shooting or stabbing violence. So,
no, so I guess my question is are there young people who are sitting in your RFP process designing what types of RFPs we should be putting out? And because what I see it, because I used to work in the nonprofit space, what happens is that you have people who have graduated from big universities. They sit together and create, this is the type of programming that's going to reduce violence. And then you send out these RSVPs, and then the community writes the RFP so that it could meet the goals and objectives of the particular RFP. But my question is, what opportunities exist where we can have a community-centered approach to developing the RFP process, where it's being led by the people who are living the realities and dodging these bullets, so that we can create the type of programming and that then people can apply for things that make more sense to what the reality is, I guess is what I'm trying to get at.
Let me yield to our director, our SSY
I just want to
director,
flag
Roy
too
Martin.
that Tina is on from the Peace Institute.
Thank you. What's going on, Tina? So yeah, actually we have. So in fact, Teen Empowerment was probably contracted for 8 years with us. So we do have a pretty extensive history with Teen Empowerment. Our last RFP, Teen did not apply. And then to answer your question about, do we have young people involved with the RFP process? Absolutely. So we have had prior program participants, as well as, just lay young people from the community participate, as well as we have pretty much a community review team made up of a bunch of different stakeholders across the city, including clergy as well. So all of our RFPs are reviewed by community people. They provide input on the programming score. We score the RFPs, and we actually had a cycle maybe about 3 or 4 years ago where we had young people come in and rate the programming that they received to kind of dictate if we were going to continue moving forward with their relationship. So I appreciate your question. Great question. And absolutely. So we have a history with Teen Empowerment, as well as program participants, young people from their age demographic participating in the scoring and selection of who's eventually contracted.
Yeah, and Mr. Martin, now that I'm seeing you here, I'm reminded of a meeting that you were a part of maybe 4 or 5 or 6 years ago. I can't keep up with all these dates anymore. But it was the Family Matters Consortium, and there was with the Sheriff's Department, there were people we were talking about the returning citizens and how do we support and wrap around. So it's good to see you in this space. It's good to know that you are in your position, and I'm incredibly grateful for the work that you all are doing. And it's good to see you again.
Thank you.
Yes, and so I just wanted to give a shout out to all the activists out there who are listening. Keep fighting, because we got to fight for every single dollar that we get. And that's it. I'm going to yield the rest of my time because we have a lot of other folks who need to speak. Thank you.
Hey, Councilor Mejia. Before we continue with questions with Councilor Salvi George, I know Chaplain Tina Sherry has just joined us. So all the other panelists had given a brief statement. If we could go to you just to make sure that your voice is centered in this too, and then we'll keep going with Q&A.
Thank you, and I apologize for leaving. I just had to deal with crisis. Truly appreciative for this opportunity. I don't know if I'm giving a statement, so I'm just going to speak. Being at these hearings is a sense of frustration, because it seems that we're coming and we're repeating the same thing and the same thing and the same thing. So I'm still hopeful, because there are a lot of people that I've done this work with, but after 26 years, something has to happen. Something different has to happen once these hearings are done. So forgive if I sound frustrated. I'm not frustrated. It's just my passion. We've been at this. We've been partnered with the City of Boston for 26 years. Under the late Mayor Menino administration and under Mayor Walsh administration, this has really become solidified. So we've done this work. And when you do this work and then your funding is cut, to be told that you don't write a good proposal is a slap in the face. So I'm going to say that, and that's for another story, but I will give a formal presentation to the Boston City Council. So under Mayor Menino's administration, Mayor Walsh administration, and working with the new administration, with the chief, we have created a true partnership with the City of Boston. I'm no longer the side chick. I'm now an integral partner with the city and doing this work that looks at healing, reconciliation, and accountability. And we fit into the model that Chief Martinez spoke because we've partnered with everyone who's made that presentation. And so we have, since January, we have provided over $40,000 to families impacted by murder just to be able to bury their loved one. And that's the Rest in Peace Fund through the City of Boston, to the advocacy of Councilor Campbell. It made happen. For 25 years, we've tried to get the city to take responsibility for the ongoing homicide that happens so that the burden does not fall on the family. It has been done. We have a Live in Peace Fund, and due to COVID-19, we have spent over $60,000 to support families financially, that the City of Boston doesn't know they exist because these are all families whose loved ones have been murdered. It's a sense of frustration. So there is hope, because this year our funding had increased. We got $25,000 from the Boston Public Health Commission every year as a contract, and this year it got increased. So we are now, and I'm gonna say formal city partnership at $100,000. The cost to do this work is $300,000. The fact that we have to write a proposal and compete with people who are not doing this work, it's really not fair to us. Because every time a homicide happens, the Peace Institute is called, and we don't deny anybody. And so our goal is working with the chief, is working with Rufus, is working with all of the city agencies. How do we really look and use Boston, establish a protocol for responding to families impacted by murder, in addition to trauma, grief, and loss? Murder is still happening, COVID-19 is happening, people are still dying, and they still need financial resources. So the work is being done. I have a 5-page report that I will give the mayor, that there are 10 points in terms of how do we do this work. But what I don't want to do is have to compete with people who have access to the people that are giving the money or that are making noise to do that. I don't want to compete. I'd rather be put out of business than to compete, than to have to write a grant for people who don't understand our work to then tell me we didn't fund you because you didn't write a proposal. It's the same damn proposal I've been writing for the past 25 years. So then tell me you're not funding me or you're cutting my funding. So I'm still hopeful. I am still committed to the City of Boston because that's the role. But I really want to offer recommendations to the Boston City Council. I really want to offer you some recommendations. We are all your constituents. We are your constituents. My invitation to each of you, take inventory who in your community is doing this work that's based under what Chief Martinez, what the city is presenting. Are we being funded by them? And if we're not being funded, what needs to happen for us to get funding, especially if you know the people in your community are doing this great work? And then bring us together. Bring us together for those that are doing prevention, intervention. What are the other two? I'm not sure what the other two are, but bring us all together so that then we can compare. And if I'm doing something that's not my lane, I don't have to do it, but I can check in with you and somebody else, and then we can support each other. I'm not a grant writer. I didn't get into this work to write grants. And for the Boston Police to tell me they cut my funding because my grant wasn't written well, that's not cool. Nobody called me to say, Tina, girl, you need help in writing this grant. This is not good. After 26 years of doing this work. So there are lots of recommendations. I'm frustrated, I'm passionate, I'm hopeful. The Resiliency Fund. Everybody's telling me they're getting funding from the Resiliency Fund. I got invited to finally write a proposal to the Resiliency Fund. I'm having a conversation. How do people get money from the Resiliency Fund, but yet I now have to write a proposal for the Resiliency Fund to get work to do to serve the City of Boston? Last but not least, again, I am committed A lot has happened. A lot can continue to happen. The city of Boston is a model across this country. It is a model. I'm asking those of you, if you're funding me, I'm asking my city councilor, my councilor at large, evaluate me. Evaluate the people that I'm serving. And if I'm not doing good work, then don't fund me. But don't let me write a proposal, then turn around and tell me I'm not qualified to do this work. Don't do that to me. I would rather evaluate the city of Boston and issue a report as to how the city of Boston is doing this work. And then we fund. Last but not least, I would ask the city councilor, can you file legislation with the state or whoever it is to give you power over the city's budget? That you are not just voting up and down, but that you have some say in the city's budget. Nice. It's not just about saying yeah or nay, but it's about having power in the city's budget. For me, for 26 years, I have done that with city councilors, and you have come and you have gone. I have so many reports that I've given so many of you with clear recommendations. There are so many reports that the city of Boston gives to the federal government for funding that uses community, yet community doesn't always benefit. A few people always benefit. Challenge me. Challenge me. Am I really doing what I said I'm supposed to be doing? I can tell you that. Survey your constituency. And if I'm not, don't fund me. So I'm committed to this. I'm committed to the city. I'm committed to the mayor. Chief Martinez, your people are amazing, but I want to put it on you guys as city councilors. We've got to go beyond these hearings, and we've got to push. All of these agencies are funding us. Some of us are getting funded 3 and 4 times from all the agencies. Take inventory. My funding from the police was cut from 44 to 22,000. And then I was told there were lots of people, but oops, we got a little bit of money and we're going to give you this $22,000. That's a slap in the face for me. That's really a slap in the face. That's really a slap in the face. But I'm committed to this city and I'm not going anywhere. And we will continue to serve. That's how committed I am to the city. There's a model that the city has, but we've got to go beyond just the city. I want to work with the city councilor. How can we do that? What can we do to let you know the work that your constituents are doing, but only a few people get funded? Only a few people get funded because we can make noise. Or if you fund me and don't fund that one, then blah, blah, blah. It can't be about that. Who is doing the work? Evaluate me. That's what I'm asking for. We work with Rufus. When a homicide happens, when families need housing, we put them up in hotel. The work has to happen. The work will continue to happen. If I am not qualified to do this work, don't fund me, but don't ask me to write proposals and then turn around and tell me I don't qualify. I'm done.
Thank you very much, Tina. We're going to keep going with questions from councilors. I see Frank. I think you are hoping to chime in. Just respectfully, this is not the sort of space to be going back and forth with the panelists. We want to make sure everyone has the chance to say what they're going to say, and then councilors ask questions. At the end,
I'll be very quick, Councilor. I just
respectfully, Frank, I will give you some of my question time when we get to it. So I want to make sure my colleagues get to ask their Q&A. Thank you, Councilor Sabi George.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you again for everyone for their presentation today. And I don't know how we worked out this timing for me to follow Tina, but just really appreciate her passion, her commitment to our city and to the residents of our city, and to this work that again goes. Certainly it's recognized and it's appreciated, but unless it's funded it's really hard to fully appreciate and recognize the efforts that are happening. So I'm curious. So I have two questions. One, to Tina, what are some of those specific next steps outside of the charter reform that she mentioned that she'd like to see us take after today? And I'm not sure if this was maybe where Frank was hoping to respond to Tina's comments, but I am curious about where, with that reduction from 44 to 22,000, where that other funding went and how those decisions were made. But so first with Tina, what are some of those actionable steps? Because I equally feel some of that frustration sometimes when we as a city council have these hearings, we do a whole lot of showboating and a whole lot of sort of expressing our issues and our concerns, but then aren't following up with those actionable items, aren't following up with the task list, and really following up with the commitment that we have to our residents and to the taxpayers of the city of Boston if we're talking about funding issues. But the work that our residents deserve needs to happen. So Tina, aside from the charter reform piece on the budget, what are some of those actionable items that you would like to see us do at the close of today's hearing? And then my question to Frank around that reduction in funding.
I would say you all know who we are. Each of you have amazing activists, programs, organizers in your district. Take inventory. Again, Chief Martinez laid it out. There are 4 pillars that the city is working with. That's in line with the Center for Disease Control's social ecological framework. In order to reduce cycles of retaliatory violence, intervention must happen at multiple levels. That's the public health model. Prevention, intervention, and healing, and all that other stuff. Primary, secondary, and tertiary. There's a new language. It is the public health approach. So what I'm asking each of you in your district, take inventory. Who are the people doing the work that falls in these categories? Are they being funded through the city of Boston? And if they're not, then how can they be? If they are being funded, what support do they need? What assets? How are their reports being done? Because sometimes also I write reports. And I'm asked what my challenges. I give my challenges, but nothing comes back to help me address those challenges. So I think that for me, that would be a way of really being engaged and involved, with the city councils, that you guys understand and know who you're, not just your constituents, but that are doing the work. And then you post it on your website. You guys have an amazing website. Then you guys share some because you're connected with some more than others. But then you share, and then you will see across the city, we are all either duplicating, doing something similar, and then how do we connect? So that's really the primary. The city of Boston issued a report, and I want to go back to the, Boston Miracle. There's a whole report on that, The reports of this great work that the city has done, recommendations that the city puts forth, and I can send you all those reports, really, for you guys to look and see who is doing the work in your district.
I'd appreciate that report. Tina, if you don't mind, that'd be great. Thank you. And Frank, do you have any information around that reduction in funding for Tina in particular, but just in general, how are those decisions made?
Well, I do know that Ms. Cherry's work and that of the Louis D. Brown Institute is legendary. It's outstanding work. If you were referring to maybe the Shannon grant RFP, I think those decisions, I know those decisions were made by a panel rather than the Boston Police Department. It was made by a panel of a cross-section of individuals in the community. So I don't think the police certainly didn't, I know they didn't certainly single you out, but that decision was made by the panel.
Yeah, and I'm gonna leave it there because I know you said council, but again, no one told me that. The reason that I got 66 applications, you didn't make the cut, and oh yeah, we got a few extra dollars, so we're giving you that. That was the reason that I got. I only found out that I was cut because I started to ask questions, and my question went to the police commissioner. But I still have not gotten any formal rejection or as to why it was cut. And so for me, that's what I'm saying. I'm going to end here. I apologize, but that's what I'm saying. These are conversations that we need to have and we need to discuss when an organization is doing work and then it's cut. Somebody needs to be able to pick up the phone. And I think that's the conversation that I heard. How do we talk to each other? Because if I'm not doing the work, then no, don't, that's okay. And so I understand we can talk later, but all of this I've tried to talk and never got anywhere.
Yeah. So I think that that's something that I can certainly commit to working with the chair and to the sponsors of today's hearing to make sure that happens. I do know that Chair Wu wanted to avoid sort of the panelists direct back and forth. So just want to sort of manage that. But Frank, I appreciate that. Frank, could you share with me the list of the panelists or the members that are on that panel, or is that a one-time, is that panel sort of, I don't know what the word is, but are they in panel?
Yeah,
at one point?
That isn't my grant, so I can't speak directly about it, except that I know it's managed by Damon Bills from our office.
Yep.
And he reaches out to a number of people in the community, and be happy to provide that information for you.
Yeah, and I can reach out as well and get that. I appreciate that. Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Tina, and to Ariana and Jaquel for your testimony today, and Rhiannon too, who I think is off screen now, but just really appreciate your commentary around including the youth. And I'd also say, when I think about the way in my work, especially around homelessness or education, I tend to enlist the same actors, even as they within the youth community, and that, we all sort of fall victim to relying on a small subset group within a particular space or whatever the theme is and the conversations we want to have. So I appreciate from all of you, especially around the youth piece, the sort of the push to make sure that we truly are engaging youth in our work and in our conversations so that they can inform and they can do it in a much better way than we can inform the work that needs to happen. So I want to appreciate that commentary and just say that it reminds me of my failings and missed opportunities to engage, and we'll certainly strive to do better in that way. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Sophie George. I see some colleagues want a second round, so we'll swing back through. Councillor Campbell, did you have other questions?
First of all, I wanted to thank Tina for hopping on. I know she was dealing with an emergency. I mean, we talk all the time. So on the funding cutting piece, had to make calls to say, this is ridiculous. That's one of the organizations in my district who was doing the work, and I'm blessed to have her as a resident in my district. But again, none of us likes wasting time. I don't like wasting my time, right? We got children, we got other things we got going on. And so still haven't yet to get a response as to the why. So happy to pull in other counselors, but Frank, I appreciate you looking into that and getting back to Tina directly on that. And Tina and I, she's exactly right. I don't like having these hearings just for the sake of having hearings. We held a similar hearing in August of last year in Mattapan. Some of the questions are still the same questions over a year later, specifically around all of the monies we get for violence prevention, intervention, recovery, reentry, all those pillars. The total monies we get, what departments get them, how do they use them, the metrics, all of that. I wanted that information to be public on our website so people can see and process that. Obviously, it's still in a sort of work in progress. Wonderful, but again, a year later. So I share the same frustration that Tina and many others do. And I will be honest, many of the providers we reached out to who participated in that first hearing and really loved to be a part of it were looking for updates. And I was sad that I could not give them the updates that I wanted. And I think folks in the public need to understand that our hearings, much of what we do with the information, we have to go through the administration. It's not like we have all this in our database. If we did, it'd be done yesterday. And so I think we're trying to figure out how we maneuver and how we get this done. On terms of action items, Council Mejia and I have already been texting. We will do that convening of bringing together the organizations doing the work that Tina just mentioned. We can do that. So that, we'll add that to our action list. We'll continue to push for the burial fund. In terms of support for organizations, Tina and I are talking now about finding them a space, using a city-owned lot for them to do their work, and finding funding external to the city to make it happen. That's been challenging, but pushing to make it happen. So I think all of us on the council side can think about how we as a collective maybe work together. And I'm not patting myself on the shoulder, sometimes tend to work in silos too, but how do we work together to support some of these organizations in terms of their support? But I agree, I too do not like wasting my time. And I'm glad Tina's pulled in a little bit more than she was, say, in the last hearing. But I wanted to just go on the record that many of the same questions I'm asking now were the same questions I asked when I originally filed this hearing order. But all of the information doesn't sit on the council side. So the accountability also has to come from the administration and pushing them to do better too. So I appreciate the administration showing up. I know it's not easy. And one thing I do want to give time to, Jaquel, I thought I saw you raising your hand. I could be wrong, but go ahead, speak. I'll give you my time. But we will continue this conversation and we will bring together those providers in short order. So thank you all for the work you do. And raise your hand, but go ahead, Jaquel, all you. And thank you, Council Wu. I know this was a long hearing.
Thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I just wanted to speak just a little bit to what Tina was speaking about around like the roles that people play. Because I think that one thing that, I didn't grow up in Boston, and one thing that I remember coming into Boston that I was so excited about was just the number of organizations that exist in Boston. They're doing such incredible work. Like, and you walk into the organization, you're like, wow, like they're engaging, communities and young people, and there's so much passion and care from these organizations. And it hurts to see like when we're like doubling up on things and wasting energy, when we are like, to Tina's point, like if we're doing something, we're trying to do it all because we're like, I want to make sure this young person or this community member or this family has what they need. So like what is sometimes frustrating is like those roles aren't really defined on a city level and definitely not on a neighborhood level of like, who does specifically, like who does the intervention side of the work here? Who does the prevention side of the work here? Who is working on like healing and recovery? Who is working on like that kind of piece is also really necessary for us as providers and as programmatic people to understand it. We need to know that as well. And I think so to Councilor Campbell's point, like having it in a space where we can access is like huge. Like we work with young people and we're like, they need mental health supports. We don't have the capacity as an organization to do that. We wouldn't be the ones to do it the best, but we have young people whose work is being impacted because they don't have that support. So how do we then make those connections? And so I think part of it is that, and I think to the other point around the funding piece, and I don't know what role the councils have in this part of it, and maybe even this is even more so to some of the people who are on that first panel, but what does it look like to have multi-year funding and then to have a process of evaluation so that people aren't like losing funding and not knowing why? A lot of that is because a lot of times the reasoning why is not being really clear, but also like what you actually need to do is unclear. Like the actual role that you need to play in order to then receive that funding again is unclear. And so I think when you think about the funding pathways, there needs to be some real clarity around like, this is the exact role that you're playing in this particular community. And like, we're gonna evaluate you based off of number of people served, based off, and I think some of that stuff is unclear. And so, and then there are things that happen, right? We had an entire, like we're dealing with this entire COVID-19 pandemic. So like, what does it matter? What happens then, right? What happens when things don't work as planned? And like, how are we supporting organizations still being able to do the work? I think that piece around space is huge. That continues to come up. We're talking about the highest risk populations. We can't just be like, join the Zoom meeting. Like, that's not going to happen. Like this summer, to Ari started speaking to a little bit earlier, when we were surveying young folks, we were looking at what communities, what parks are being highest hit by violence. We're going to take young people and take all the safety precautions we can. And we're going to take young people from our group to go out and survey those young people where they are, in the park where they are, at the basketball court where they are. Because if that's not happening, we don't have the resources to be able to connect with young folks where they are and community members where they are, we're going to we're going to backtrack, right? We don't, like this pandemic is obviously going to have an impact, but we need to be like proactively fighting against the things that we can't, like, okay, we can't gather inside and say, so where are the outdoor places? What are the places, what are the buildings right now that aren't being used that we can socially distance and bring young folks into buildings that are up the street from their houses and not making them trek across the city to do so? Like, what are the ways in which we can be really intentional about localized work with young people and community members so that, like, to the point before, like, they don't have to hear about some hearing because there's something that's happening, there's a space that's happening like right in the walking distance of where they're living and where they are. And so I think a lot around when teen empowerment was at its strongest, we were in like 12 different sites across the city. It's really difficult to do the work when you're like, when there's not the capacity and resources to like do that in these localized neighborhoods instead of trying to do it for an entire city out of 1 or 2 sites. Like that doesn't bring the impact that's needed. And so I think on the piece of like both documenting where people are and what people's lane is, I guess at that point, what organizations' lanes are, making that publicly available, and then really providing the resources so that we can still meet young folks where they are. And meet community members at large where they are, because we're dealing with populations of young people and people in general who aren't resourced enough to be able to engage in the things that we have available. And so it doesn't matter if we have resources if people can't access them. And so I think that's a real place that I hope that future conversations continue to like dive into, is specifically like how do we make sure that access exists and not just the resources. Thank you for that time.
Mr. Mejia?
Yes, thank you. Thank you. I am very mindful of time. I didn't get to hear Tina before I had my questions, but I wanted to just acknowledge that Tina and I go way back, 1994. I know Teens Against Gang Violence. Her son, Louis D. Brown, was a part of that organization. Like, for me, I share the same frustration that Tina expressed earlier in terms of like, we keep having these conversations and expecting different results, but the work really doesn't seem to be moving in the direction that it needs to, right? So something has to give. Boston is resource rich and coordination poor. I say that every time. We're the mecca of the nonprofit sector, right? And we still can't get it together in a way that is doing a concerted effort, including our Boston public schools, right? Everybody's siloed. And I think that we need to start really thinking about how do we have a community conversation and how do we bring all of our resources to the table and really do some asset mapping and figuring out, are we really being intentional and strategic about how we're funding organizations? Who are the organizations, like Jaquel said, are doing X, Y, and Z? That all needs to be unpacked, because otherwise it's just a whole bunch of more lip service, which is what everybody's getting sick and tired of these days. And I think we need to move beyond these dialogues. And I really do appreciate the hearings because they inspire us to think about the work differently. But I can also understand the level of frustration because we're still dodging these same bullets. And it doesn't really seem like much is changing. Changing is the people that are on the council. That's it. But the work and the lives and the impact that we're making, I don't feel is, we could be doing a lot more if we're being more strategic about who we fund and how we go about doing it. So I just wanted to thank you all again for staying for so long and being engaged in this conversation and bringing all of you and all of who you are into these spaces. Deeply, deeply grateful for all of it. And to you, Councilor Wu, for allowing us to babble as long as we have. And my sister in service, Councilor Campbell, for your steadfast conviction in this space and here for the next steps. Thank you.
Councilor Mejia. So I want to give space. I don't know. I know, Frank, you had chimed in earlier with Councilor Sapi George's questioning. Did you have more you wanted to add that I had cut you off from before?
No, I was just addressing the fact about how the selection process for the Shannon grant.
Okay, got it.
That's all.
Thank you.
But thank you.
Wonderful. And did any of the other panelists want any parting thoughts? Ari, did you want to chime in with anything else?
I think that with all of this, like, being able to have this opportunity is incredible. So again, I'm going to thank you all, and looking up to, all of you. it's just incredible to have, you know, women like you in office, you know, right in our backyards, basically, and having this opportunity. In addition to all that, I believe that, like has already been said, violence prevention work, it's not going to get done with the way it's going right now. Being basically segregated, different organizations not working together, it's not helpful. It's not helpful at all. Say if we have a young person that you know is coming out of a situation and all we can give them is a job, but they can't handle the amount of structure that we have in our work for us, and we don't have that resource. You know, we shouldn't sit here and force them into this box of so much structure when they can't handle that after coming out of something like DYS care or something like that, where it's like they can't handle the amount of structure because they're not used to it, or they can't come back into that space because they can't handle it. We shouldn't have to just be like, well, we're either going to try to force you into this box, which is not helpful, or just try to, you know, be like, okay, we can't help you. That shouldn't be the case. That should be the case. What should be the case is like, oh wait, I know X, Y, and Z organization that can actually help you, actually has the resources for you. That's the way that we should be like working with young people, especially opportunity youth. Because it's ridiculous for us to have to turn a young person away and just be like, well, I don't really know which organization. I mean, maybe this could be the case. That doesn't make any sense at all. If we're unable to, you know, employ a young person based off of their you know, immigration status, based off of their living situation, based off of their, you know, the area they live in, whatever you may have it, you know, we should be able to defer them to be like, there's this other organization that I know, or here's somebody that might know an organization, even though we don't. It's like, why should we force young people to, not force them, but feel like this is the only option they have, our organization's the only option they have to work with? Sure, we would love for that to be the case. We would love there to be one universal organization that our young people are able to get everything from, like a you know, violence prevention hub or something. That'd be great, but it's unrealistic. So in all honesty, being able to come together with city councilors, with other organizations, with, you know, other activists and things like that in the community, it's essential. So if there are any spaces, you know, any more spaces that you guys can create, that'd be amazing if you guys have the time. I would hope you'd make the time for more of things like this, not just something that's once a year, because receiving this opportunity to be here has been amazing, and I feel like other young people need to hear things like this, and be a part of this conversation. But if these spaces aren't made and aren't, you know, adapted to accept all people, not just you know, adults, then they shouldn't be happening. Thank you.
Thank you, Ari. We're just keeping these seats warm until you get here, and we know that'll be sooner than later. Anyone else want to chime in before we wrap? Brianne came back on camera. Or parting words from Scott, Jaquel.
I just want to say thank you for having me and taking the time to listen to everybody. And it's been really valuable for me to hear everybody's insights. And I just want to echo what Teen Empowerment said. Their organization sounds great, and I've been part of this field for a while, and I've never heard of them. So I definitely echo trying to collaborate with other nonprofits and organizations serving this youth. Thank you.
Thank you. Everyone else good? Oh, go ahead, Jaquel.
I was just say, I know I've spoken a lot. I just want to echo that thanks for the space to do this. And just again, like really looking forward to continuing not just the conversation, but the calls for action, not just for this council, but recognize this is larger than that, right? Like the calls to the mayor, the call to like even on the state level to really think about how we're doing this work. And so just appreciate continuing to be a part of this conversation and really looking forward to next steps. Also, I'm sorry, this dog is really like, I like keep leaning over, I'm just all over the place. But yeah, just want to really appreciate all of you.
Thank you. Reverend Scott?
No, I didn't really have anything else to say. I was just coming back on camera, but I'll echo that appreciation. I think a lot of important things were said. by everybody, particularly appreciative of teen empowerment and the work that you've done. I was in a meeting with the mayor right after he had spoken with a number of young people in teen empowerment. I'll say it was a very impactful conversation. So appreciate that. And then just finally, I think Ariana said something very important around the word segregation. And what would be interesting for future city council meetings is to mix it up, to mix the city agency people up with the community people, the older people up with the younger people, the people who are speaking, giving testimony as residents. Just mix us all up. And maybe make it more of a space that we can kind of go at it a little bit, right? And have a lot of back and forth and exchange, right? Even argue, right?
Did you hear that, Nico? The council always asks for that. The administration usually pushes that.
Thank you, Councilman, because I was definitely laughing. I was like, okay, good luck.
Yeah, well,
You're in trouble, Mark.
You hear that?
You're in trouble, Mark.
no, it's tape recorded, so it's too late, right? So mix it up.
Great. Captain Cherry, any final remarks?
I just want to say again, I'm in this for life. December will be 27 years since Lewis is gone. The victims were not even born that are being killed now. The killers were not even born that are killing and going to jail. And for me, it's the families that's still missing from these conversations. Who are the families of the people that we're working with? I am committed to this city. I travel across the country, and Boston is a model. I make sure that I tell people, we have the best city, we have the best people, we have the best resources. We are a city that's committed. And I think Councilor Mejia said it, we're resource filled. We still got work to do in terms of breaking down silos. So I commend you guys. I appreciate you. Again, it's a commitment, it's a work, and everybody's here because we are committed to this city, and that's what I hold on to. I hold on to my faith and my hope, and the commitment to the young people that are a part of this work and that are taking leadership. But also, you can't do it without the old folks, so I'm not going anywhere. And I do have to go because I do have a meeting now with the Resiliency Fund, so keep that in prayer.
Thank you, Tina. Good luck. Keep us posted.
All right, we'll close out with our lead sponsors, Councilor Mejia and then Councilor Campbell.
I don't even want, it's past 4 o'clock. Councilor Wu, thank you for chairing a long hearing. I saw the kiddos, we all got kids, dogs, so thank you. And Councilor Mejia, thank you for the partnership here. We will follow up to make that next conversation happen with respect to the organizations, getting to know each other, how we frame that. But I really appreciate the work of everyone who participated today. I know it's not easy work, and folks have been doing this a really long time, many before they even came to the city of Boston as an employee. So I appreciate you, where I see you pop back on. So just thank you guys for staying on so long, particularly folks from the administration, and listening to the providers, hearing their frustrations. I know sometimes we share the same thing, but I'm in this work, like Tina said, to have an impact. I love this city. I love the district I have the responsibility of serving, which is very much experiencing every inequity you can talk about, including the uptick in violence. So here to be a partner in that work. So thank you guys for taking the time today, and look forward to the next steps. And thank you again, Councilor Mejia, for the partnership.
Thank you. Councilor Mejia?
Yes, thank you, Councilor Wu, and thank you everybody who stayed on this long. Y'all are so dope, because I'd be like, yo, I gotta go. So that just goes to show your commitment to this conversation, both the administration and the community partners that have stayed in. Councilor Campbell, you have just been leading in this conversation in this space, with rightfully so. Your lived experience is exactly why we are here having this conversation when it comes to the violence that we see in our streets. So just wanted to thank you for always bringing me into the conversation and creating a seat at the table for me to join you in this dialogue. I think in this during this hearing. Many of you realize how old I really was because I was doing this work even before the work was needed to be done. And so, and I didn't just talk about the fact that I was around in the 90s just for the sake of speaking about it, but it was really just to kind of really show you all how important it is for us to recognize that these conversations are not new. But what is new is the sense of urgency and the political will that we are seeing now from the council that we have in this office in this year. And so that speaks volumes to where the opportunity lies and really in terms of bringing the work forward. But the most important thing is that we can't do this work without doing so in partnership with those who are doing the work and living the realities. So really just wanted you all to know that you continue to count on me as a partner alongside this journey. And thank you, Councilor Wu, and thank you, Councilor Campbell, and thank you to all who participated today. That's all I gotta say.
Thank you. Oh, go ahead. Roy, did you want to jump in?
Oh, no. I just wanted to say thank you. I spilled some on my shirt, so I had to change that. That would have been embarrassing if you had witnessed that. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. This will conclude our hearing on docket number 0828, order for a hearing to review all grants, city funds, and city programs for violence prevention and intervention purposes. Stay tuned for next steps from our lead sponsors. Thanks, everyone. Have a good day.
Thank you.